The Princess Bride was not a blockbuster. In fact, it was the 41st highest-grossing film of 1987, barely beating out Revenge of the Nerds 2, Nerds in Paradise. So unlike Star Wars and Jaws and The Godfather and every other film we've talked about, The Princess Bride was not an instant hit with audiences. Which raises the question, why are we talking about it? Why aren't we letting it rest in the dustbin of history alongside Nerds in Paradise? The answer is that The Princess Bride became a sleeper hit. After it was released on home video, it grew into one of the most beloved films of all time, establishing itself as a cult classic. And this cult afterlife is why we're going to study the script of The Princess Bride today. Because the script didn't just attract a huge and devoted audience. It did it in a special way. It quietly became beloved in people's homes, shared between friends as a secret treasure. Or to be more precise about it, a secret tweasure. It became a running-in joke, a private language between people in the know, because it provided an enchantingly intimate experience, unlike any other movie on our list. In this lecture, we'll explore how The Princess Bride created this experience, so you can generate the same secret devotion in your audience as you wish. Let's start as always with the ending. So go watch The Princess Bride or read the script if you haven't yet, so you can get in on the secret. Now, using our method of reverse engineering, let's treat the script's ending as a destination for our minds, identifying the specific cognitive effect of its final lines as precisely as we can. The Princess Bride is a fairy tale of true love, read by a grandfather to his sick grandson. And here's how it draws to a close.
Grandpa, maybe you could come over and read it again to me tomorrow, as you wish.
Then the script fades out for good, bringing an end to both of the stories it's been telling. The fairy tale is finished, and so is the framing narrative of the grandfather and the kid. But the last lines of the script show us that neither story is really over. The grandfather will come back tomorrow and read the story again, because he and the kid have made a special connection. That's why the script's final line is an in-joke, as you wish. In the secret language shared by the characters in the fairy tale, as you wish means I love you. And now this secret language is shared by the kid and his grandfather. And it's also shared by us. The technical term for this cognitive effect is charm. When something charms you, you feel a special connection with it, a private sense of pleasure that comes from appreciating a hidden wonder that not everybody sees. What other people see as old or weird or ugly, you see as one of a kind, because only you perceive the secret value in it. This way of appreciating something is very different from the form of appreciation we explored in Star Wars. The goal of Star Wars is to make everyone like its story in a public way, to generate epic feelings of awe, of wonder, of the cosmically spectacular. The goal of The Princess Bride is to make just you like it in a very private way. That's charm. This feeling of quiet intimacy, of sharing a secret, is why The Princess Bride is considered so quotable. Because to smile at these offbeat little quotes is to participate in a secret community. Perhaps the script's most famous line is inconceivable. Why on earth is that so funny? Well, of course, I can't explain it. You have to watch the movie to know. You have to be in on the secret. So how does the script charm us? And how can you charm readers with your own scripts? Well, following our method of reverse engineering, let's look at how The Princess Bride constructs its unique forms of story world, character, plot, and tone, giving you the secret blueprint. Unlike the previous scripts we've studied, The Princess Bride seems to have two worlds. There's the framing world, or the real world, of the grandfather and the kid, and then there's the fairy tale world, the made-up world of Florin. But from a screenwriting perspective, both worlds are really extensions of the same underlying story world. And the script for The Princess Bride introduces them by establishing the same world rule. Here's the introduction of the real world of the kid, in the opening lines.
A video game on a computer screen. The game is in progress as a sick coughing sound is heard. Cut to the kid. Lying in bed, coughing, pale, one sick cookie. Maybe he's 7 or 8 or 9. He holds a remote in one hand, presses it, and the video game moves a little bit. Then he's hit by another spasm of coughing, puts the remote down. His room is monochromatic, grays and blues, mildly high-tech. We're in the present day, and this is a middle-class house, somewhere in the suburbs.
Here, the script establishes that the rule of the framing world is an unhealthy loneliness. A sickly, coughing kid is playing a video game by himself, a miniature example of the way that people build their own unhappily solipsistic castles in the monochrome suburbs. Now, let's turn to the second world, the world of the fairy tale, and see how that's introduced.
Chapter 1. Buttercup was raised on a small farm in the country of Florin.
Dissolve to. The story he's reading about, as the monochromatic look of the bedroom is replaced by the dazzling color of the English countryside.
Her favorite pastimes were riding her horse and tormenting the farm boy that worked there. His name was Wesley, but she never called him that. Nothing gave Buttercup as much pleasure as ordering Wesley around.
Farm boy, polish my horse's saddle. I want to see my face shining in it by morning.
On the surface, this fairy tale world seems very different from the monochromatic world of the suburbs. For one thing, it's in dazzling color. But Buttercup's actions are scripted to embody the same deep law that drives the kid's behavior. Buttercup is playing her own solitary games, riding by herself and bossing Wesley around. And like the kid, Buttercup gets a kind of pleasure from these lonely pursuits. But it's not a deep and lasting satisfaction. It's just a passing ego trip. And to further bind the worlds together, the script makes the same rule the essence of the fairy tale's antagonists. As we've seen, antagonists are the face of the story world. They embody the rule that the main characters fight to change. So if you can't locate the core rule in a script's opening page, just identify the antagonist's opening principle of life. And boom, that's the rule of the story world. The main antagonist in The Princess Bride is Crown Prince Humperdinck. And we don't have to study Humperdinck long to see that he's unhealthily self-centered. He forces Buttercup to marry him, which is to say, he treats marriage like a video game with one controller. He demonstrates his introverted paranoia through lines like, "I always think everything could be a trap, which is why I'm still alive." And finally, he reveals that he was never interested in marrying Buttercup at all. She was just a pawn in a grand geopolitical chess match he's constructed in his imagination, a game he's playing all by himself. So the same rule of action binds together both the kid's world and the fairy tale world. Everyone is unhealthily self-centered. The general screenwriting lesson here is that if you have multiple worlds within a single script, they all should be part of one big story world. So introduce all your geographical locales and your antagonist by stressing the same deep story rule. And the more specific screenwriting trick is that if you want to create charm, begin your script with two worlds that seem totally different, but are really the same. Why? Because that's the structure of a riddle. Two opposite things that are really the same. When is a door not a door? When it's ajar. This riddle structure is an enormous source of charm. Keep listening, and you'll learn the secret why. The Princess Bride's characters are introduced in direct opposition to the world's unhealthy introversion. The first main character to be established is the grandfather. Before the grandfather arrives, the kid predicts that he'll be weird and do old person things. And lo and behold, the grandfather barges in and does weird old person things. But once the kid's mother beats a hasty retreat, never to be seen again, the grandfather's full character emerges. He reveals that he's brought a special present, and he hands the kid a carefully wrapped package. Then, when the kid opens the package to find a book inside, the grandfather explains, "This is a special book. It was the book my father used to read to me when I was sick, and I used to read it to your father, and today I'm going to read it to you." The first clever thing to notice about the screenwriting here is that the grandfather hasn't just brought a book. He's gone to the trouble of wrapping the book. He didn't need to do this. After all, books are by their very nature already wrapped. To find out what mysteries they contain, you have to open their covers. But by making the extra effort to bundle up the book, the grandfather emphasizes what the book is to him. It's a secret, waiting to be unwrapped. So by introducing the grandfather as the keeper of a special secret, the script makes him a source of charm. And the script continues in this vein when the grandfather reveals that his book has helped create a secret little community. The grandfather's father read this book to him, and then he read it to the kid's father. So in other words, this book isn't a bestseller that the whole world knows about. It's a hidden gem, passed down by people in the know. And now we get to be one of those people. We get to share the secret too. The script's next main character, Wesley, is similarly introduced as a maker of a special togetherness that opposes the unhealthy introversion of the story world. Like the grandfather, Wesley is portrayed as kooky and marginal at first. He does only two things. First, he obeys all of Buttercup's orders. And second, he endlessly repeats the same phrase, "as you wish." But slowly, the more this pattern repeats itself, the more a hidden meaning becomes clear. One day, when Buttercup orders Wesley to fill some buckets with water, Wesley responds as always, "as you wish." But this time, Buttercup sees the words' hidden meaning. She suddenly realizes they mean, "I love you." And to Buttercup's surprise, she then realizes that she loves Wesley back. With this little scene, the script establishes Wesley as the human version of the grandfather's wrapped story. It takes Buttercup a while to tear off the wrapping, but once she does, she finds the secret inside of Wesley's words. And just like the grandfather's book, that secret is the start of a shared community. Because once Buttercup discovers the secret meaning of "as you wish," she realizes that her wish is to be with Wesley. So you see how elegantly The Princess Bride uses its own spin on the conflict between story world and character to create charm. And if you want to create that same cognitive effect, you can follow its blueprint. First, portray a main character as weird. Then reveal that there's something more beneath the character's surface. And then turn that something more into a mutual affection between two characters, so that what seemed odd initially becomes a source of charm. So that's how world and character can be engineered to create charm. And before moving on to discuss plot, we're going to jump ahead to discuss the tone first. That's because tone is unusually important to generating this script's cognitive effect. Charm, like the feeling of big wonder that we explored in our lecture on Star Wars, is deeply rooted in how you look. What seems odd or old-fashioned to one pair of eyes can seem charming to another. It all depends on how you look. And since the tone of a script tells the reader how to look, the tone of The Princess Bride is a major source of its charm. The moment you start reading the script, you instantly notice its tone. It feels different, unusual, like it's hiding a special secret. How does the script establish this gently intriguing tone? Mainly, it does so by infusing every beat of action with the lightest hint of irony. Take this beat between the assassin Inigo and Wesley, now wrapped up in special packaging as the Man in Black. In a script filled with quirky moments, this is one of the quirkiest. Two men are about to duel to the death when one of the men asks the other if he has an extra digit on his right hand. It seems utterly random. It's funny, but not really in a ha-ha way. It's more funny in the sense of just being peculiar. But then this feeling of strangeness is converted into a genuine smile by the Man in Black's response. Do you always begin conversations this way? The humor of the Man in Black's question lies in its genuine undercurrent of curiosity. I mean, does Inigo always begin conversations this way? After all, his question about the sixth finger is so specific that it calls out for some explanation. And maybe that explanation is that Inigo has a very weird way of making small talk. Some people discuss the weather. Inigo chats about rare but harmless congenital anomalies. That would be a hilariously ridiculous personality trait, a wonderful hidden joke. And crucially, from a technical literary standpoint, it's also an instance of irony. Irony is often overcomplicated by professors when they try to explain it, so allow me to make it just complicated enough. Irony is a way of looking at the world that implies there's a hidden logic to it. So the ironic tone of ancient tragedies like Oedipus comes from the way that their scripts suggest that a hidden logic of fate lurks behind even the most seemingly minor details. And irony also has more comic everyday uses, where you imply that you see a darkly funny, deeper truth about the way the world works. So if you say, "I actually did my homework for once, so of course I forgot it at home," then your ironic "of course" reveals that you're wise to the fact that the universe has a secret plan to make you flunk. The same sense of a hidden meaning to life is implied by the man in black's question to Inigo. When the man in black says, "Do you always begin conversations this way?" he suggests that Inigo's random question is not in fact random. It reflects some deeper, hidden truth. Perhaps this truth is that Inigo has an unusual way of starting conversations. Or perhaps the truth is just that everyone in Florin is completely insane. Either way, it's ironic. In our introductory lectures, we saw that the most straightforward way to create irony is to juxtapose significant things with minor ones, implying a hidden joke in the narrator's mind. The Princess Bride uses the same strategy, but with a lightness of touch that makes the joke even less obvious and so even more secret. So for example, there's the moment where the man in black says to another assassin, "You mean you'll put down your rock and I'll put down my sword and we'll try to kill each other like civilized people?" The ironic juxtaposition here being between civilization and hand-to-hand murder. Or there's when Inigo says, "We need a miracle. It's very important." The irony being that miracles are, in general, quite important. Or finally, there's the impressive clergyman who declares marriage, the blessed arrangement, that dweem with him a dweem. The irony being that there is something not entirely impressive about the way that the impressive clergyman speaks. I can't put my finger on it, but maybe you can. So if you want to establish a tone that charms your reader, follow the lead of the Princess Bride's ironic narrator. Make gentle juxtapositions between the serious and the silly that hint at something more beneath the surface, building every beat of action and dialogue in delicate layers of irony that hold the promise of a special connection, a chance to join a community of like-minded souls, sharing in the same secret gift. Now let's talk about the fourth and final main story element of The Princess Bride, its plot. Like the tone, the plot is reverse engineered to create an air of secrets. One major early example of this plot technique is the man in black. Who is this mysterious stranger who can accomplish such extraordinary feats with such magical grace? Why is he following Buttercup and the assassins? Why does he fall down, apparently dead, at Buttercup's command? And the same explicit posing of mysteries is injected into myriad other plot moments, big and small. Here's how Buttercup is reintroduced to the story after we haven't seen her for 5 years. Humperdinck raises his hands and starts to speak. "My people, a month from now, our country will have its 500th anniversary. On that sundown, I shall marry a lady who was once a commoner like yourselves. But perhaps you will not find her common now." This is a grandly public attempt to whet our curiosity. What has happened to Buttercup after all this time? What kind of person is she now? And this moment also builds a sense of mystery in a more subtle way. By telling us that Buttercup is a commoner who is no longer common, Humperdinck poses a riddle. When is a door not a door? What gets wetter the more that it dries? How can a commoner not be common? The power of these riddles is that they whisper to us of a secret answer. Like irony, they charm us with the promise of a hidden truth, if only we can unwrap it. A thing that gets wetter the more that it dries is a towel. And a commoner is not common when, well, you've read the script, so you already know that one. The whole plot of The Princess Bride works like a constant exercise in posing riddles. Violent assassins somehow turn out to be thoughtful and even humane. Married women somehow turn out to be not so married. Men who duel with their left hand somehow turn out not to be so left-handed. The dead somehow turn out not to be so dead. The more times the script does this, the more it encourages a sense of puzzles and mysteries everywhere, even when they're not explicitly announced. And the script continues this tactic of spinning plot riddles right up to the very end. Why does Wesley need a wheelbarrow to save Buttercup? How will Inigo Montoya avenge his father once he is mortally wounded? How is Wesley supposed to defeat Humperdinck when he can't move? Since the recipe for charm is sharing secrets, the plot never stops implying that there's more secret answers to come. This constantly repeated technique, more than any overall plot structure, is how the plot of The Princess Bride, like the plot of many fairy tales, generates charm. Fairy tales are often rambling, baggy, and episodic in their narratives. So what makes them charm is not an overarching plot. It's lots of little episodic riddles, each with its own quirky answer. If you want a classic example of this anti-structure, you can read the brilliant 16th century Italian romance, Orlando Furioso. If you'd like a more modern example, you can watch Monty Python and the Holy Grail. These stories consciously resist the unified epic narrative of scripts like the Iliad and Star Wars. Instead, they charm through wandering eccentricity. So if you want to charm, don't make your plot too linear. Build it around lots and lots of little riddle moments that the characters have to solve. Because charm isn't about a clear public purpose. It's about endless, unexpected, secret discoveries along the way. Now that we've reverse engineered the nuts and bolts of the Princess Bride story world, character, plot, and tone, let's flesh out the script's blueprint for charm by looking at two of its key scenes in more granular detail. Because even though the overall script isn't tightly plotted, its individual scenes are. So if you want to create a script that charms, copy the model of these individual scenes, and then string them together like the pearls on Buttercup's bridal necklace. The most powerful sources of charm are things that the entire world has written off as ugly, but that your eye reclaims. So let's look at how the script is able to make even its undistinguished minor antagonists, the assassins Inigo and Fezzik, into charmers. Their breakthrough occurs in a scene where they quietly rebel against their leader Vizzini, telling him that they think there's something wrong with killing Buttercup. You know, seeing as how she's innocent and all.
And you, friendless, brainless, helpless, hopeless, do you want me to send you back to where you were, unemployed, in Greenland?
That Vizzini, he can fuss.
I think he likes to scream at us?
Probably he means no harm.
He's really very short on charm.
Oh, you've a great gift for rhyme.
Yes, some of the time.
Enough of that!
Fezzik, are there rocks ahead?
If there are, we'll all be dead.
No more rhymes now! I mean it!
Anybody want a peanut?
Ah!
This scene begins, like the whole script begins, by introducing the core rule of the story world. As we've seen, this rule is that each of us is unhealthily stuck on our own private island, which is what Vizzini threatens to do quite literally to Fezzik, send him back, friendless and hopeless, to Greenland. Why does this scene begin by refreshing the core rule of the story world? Well, this is a common screenwriting technique to increase the story's momentum. As we saw back in our introductory lecture on plot, the key to creating urgency, dramatic stakes, and forward thrust is conflict. Whenever your plot seems to drift or lag or stall, you want to refresh a sense of conflict, either between characters or within characters or between characters and their story world. And since the deepest and most powerful form of conflict is between a character and their story world, the quickest way to give your plot a kick and wake up your readers is to reestablish the power of the story world at the beginning of your scene. That prompts your characters to push back against the world, propelling the action ahead. That's why suspense scripts frequently begin scenes by refreshing the conflict with the world, like we saw in the Alex Kintner scene in Jaws. And episodic, wandering romances like The Princess Bride rely on this technique too, although for different reasons. the Princess Bride isn't trying to make the action as intense as possible. That kind of action suspense would crush out the more delicate suspense of unwrapping a riddle. But the danger of the Princess Bride's episodic pearls on a necklace structure is that the momentum from one scene doesn't carry on to the next. So individual scenes often create their own mini-arcs and mini-stakes by refreshing the story world in their opening beats, like Vizzini does when he mentions Greenland, raising the conflict when Inigo resists. And the way the scene portrays Inigo's resistance is crucial, because like the grandfather in Wesley, Inigo reaches out with riddle words that mean more than they seem on the surface. And after a moment, Fezzik cracks the secret code and joins in until both of them are playing the rhyming game together. It's a silly in-joke, a peculiar little community of their own, so it perfectly achieves the script's intended effect of charm. For our second scene, let's look at perhaps the most legendary moment in The Princess Bride, the Battle of Wits. After the man in black puts poison in one of two goblets, Vizzini must choose which one to drink.
But it's so simple. All I have to do is divine from what I know of you. Are you the sort of man who would put the poison in his own goblet or his enemy's? Now, a clever man would put the poison into his own goblet, because he would know that only a great fool would reach for what he was given. I am not a great fool, so I can clearly not choose the wine in front of you. But you must have known I was not a great fool. You would have counted on it, so I can clearly not choose the wine in front of me.
You've made your decision then.
Not remotely, because iocane comes from Australia, as everyone knows, and Australia is entirely peopled with criminals, and criminals are used to having people not trust them, as you are not trusted by me, so I can clearly not choose the wine in front of you.
And so it goes, with Vizzini growing in confidence until he selects a goblet, drains it with a knowing smile on his face, and promptly dies. At which point, the man in black turns to Buttercup and explains, "They were both poisoned. I spent the last few years building up an immunity to iocane powder." So how does this scene work? Well, just like the other scene, it first refreshes the stakes by reestablishing the rule of the world, which it does by showing Vizzini's unhealthy introversion taking over everything. Like a suburbanite, painstakingly decorating the interior of his house to suit his personal taste, Vizzini vanishes into a vortex of his own point of view, becoming more and more convinced of the correctness of his own personal perspective, until he gets so far from the path of a healthy mind that his introversion literally kills him. At which point, the man in black then reveals the hidden secret of the wine to Buttercup, binding Buttercup and the man in black in a community of charm. So like the rhyming scene in the boat, the plot of this scene follows a very clear two-part structure. First, it refreshes the conflict by reestablishing the story world as a place of destructive insularity. And second, it introduces a character who challenges the story world through an intimate reveal, creating a special moment of togetherness. So if you want to write a charming scene, follow this structure. And if you want to write a charming script, follow this structure in every one of your scenes. That way, through all of your plot's narrative rambles, your story will feel like it has a single continuous purpose. Because your script's secret desire will always be to release us from our self-made prisons into moments where we share a private joke. If you want to write a charming script, The Princess Bride is a great blueprint to study. Use a lightly ironic tone. Fill your plot with quirky secrets. Have your characters share private jokes. And even if you don't want your whole script to charm, Wesley and the grandfather can still be valuable guides. Because almost every script has room for at least a little charm. Some character, or location, or story beat that has a hidden secret to it. So borrow one of the Princess Bride's storytelling tricks to give your audience that special feel of secrets. Because secrets are the best things in the world. Except, of course, for fencing, fighting, torture, revenge, true love, and giants. If you'd like to start practicing your charm, here's a couple exercises you can try. First, write a scene about two characters with highly unusual pasts who meet in a place where highly unusual pasts are sternly frowned upon. So the two characters engage in the usual approved small talk until they start to suspect they might have more in common. But to avoid persecution, they don't come right out and admit their strange backstories. Instead, they drop hints and innuendos, becoming secret friends. Second, imagine that two very different people, maybe an 18-year-old and an 80-year-old, are in the clutches of some soul-destroying place. Maybe an evil villain who's threatening them with his pain machine. Or maybe one of those endless work meetings where the boss can't stop talking about his own enormous brilliance. Now dramatize a scene where those two very different people create an inside joke to keep themselves sane. From the beginning, Hollywood movies have been intended to stop people thinking. Not because the studios are part of a vast anti-intellectual conspiracy, but because the studios realized long ago that the best way to maximize their box office was to seduce us with feelings like romance and wonder and fear. These emotions form the core of our brains. They're the deepest and strongest drivers of our identity and how we behave. And that's why our passions can push us to do great and transformative things. But it's also why we're so easily conned into irrational self-destruction, allowing the more cynical executives of Hollywood studios to get us all drunk on empty video entertainments while the real world burns outside. But Hollywood movies don't need to bamboozle us with emotional escapism. They can instead wake up our minds. And no Hollywood filmmaker has been more committed to waking us up than Spike Lee. Like regular Hollywood scripts, Lee's scripts are filled with emotional effects. Classic emotional effects like sentiment and the sublime. Big emotional effects like fear and wonder. Subtle emotional effects like longing and charm. But Lee's scripts are also designed to do something more ambitious and revolutionary than make us feel. They're designed to make us think more deeply and more critically. This drive to make audiences think is why Lee wrote the script for Do the Right Thing, which became a cultural phenomenon and a box office sensation, earning a nomination for an Academy Award for Best Original Screenplay, of which it was, quite frankly, robbed. In this lecture, we'll learn Spike Lee's special recipe for making people think, so that you can snap Hollywood awake. Let's start as always with the ending, identifying as precisely as we can the cognitive effect of Do the Right Thing's final moments. So if you haven't watched Do the Right Thing or read the script yet, you'll want to hit pause now so you can do so. Spike Lee's script chronicles a hot day in Bed-Stuy, Brooklyn, where racial tensions between African-American residents and the Italian-American proprietors of a local pizzeria escalate into a brawl that leads to a police killing of an unarmed resident, which in turn incites a crowd to burn down the pizzeria. Until finally, the script draws to a close with two quotes, one from Dr. Martin Luther King and one from Malcolm X. Here's a shortened version of King's quote. "Violence as a way of achieving racial justice is both impractical and immoral. Violence ends up defeating itself. It creates bitterness in the survivors and brutality in the destroyers." Here's the end of Malcolm X's quote. "I am not against using violence in self-defense. I don't even call it violence when it's self-defense. I call it intelligence." King, in other words, utterly rejects violence, while Malcolm X calls it smart. How can that be? How can these two opposite perspectives both be right? Well, that's for you to figure out, because the point of Lee's script isn't to tell you what to think, it's to push you to think for yourself. After all, isn't that what the best teachers do? They don't hand you prepackaged answers. They encourage you to seek the answers on your own, so you stop passively memorizing the textbook and actively ask yourself, who's right about violence, MLK or Malcolm X? The technical literary term for this experience of getting woke by a script is the alienation effect, which is the most usual English translation of Verfremdungseffekt, a term coined by the German playwright Bertolt Brecht. Brecht was writing and producing scripts in Germany at the time of the Nazi rise to power. And Brecht saw that a huge part of the Nazis' political success was due to Joseph Goebbels' theories about propaganda. Goebbels explicitly intended propaganda to shut off people's minds by drenching them in fear and hate and wonder and other strong emotions that swept them into accepting the ideology of Hitler's regime. Notoriously, in cinema history, there's Leni Riefenstahl's Nazi propaganda film Triumph of the Will, which is engineered to create a vast sense of awe that makes the viewing mind capitulate. Brecht was a fierce opponent of fascism, and to disrupt the effects of propaganda, he decided to write scripts that generated the opposite cognitive effect. Instead of brainwashing people, Brecht's alienation effect would wake up their minds, spurring them to think critically about what the Nazis were doing. To reverse engineer this alienation effect, Brecht wrote scripts that jolted and confused his audience's feelings. Scripts that called attention to their own fakeness. Scripts that refused to end satisfyingly. Scripts that pressed audiences to question, to object, and to think. So just like Casablanca's romantic sentimentalism, Brecht's alienation effect was a response to Hitler's fascist ideology. But the responses were polar opposites. Casablanca encouraged audiences to leave reason for feeling. Brecht's alienation effect urged them to leave feeling for reason. Brecht's techniques for generating the alienation effect were continued by many post-war scriptwriters, and they remained influential in American film schools in the 1980s, when Spike Lee was at NYU. Lee gravitated to Brecht's teachings because he had come to the conclusion that Hollywood was itself cranking out a form of propaganda. This propaganda wasn't part of some conscious fascist plot. It simply reflected the fact that Hollywood was so financially invested in pleasing audiences that it preferred to offer them mental comfort food, so that instead of doing the hard and honest work of serious art, Hollywood catered to audiences with sentimental escapism. As an example of this escapism, Spike Lee pointed to the film Driving Miss Daisy. Driving Miss Daisy tells the story of a white woman who bonds with her black chauffeur over Martin Luther King, pumpkin pie, and a shared discovery that they're both being discriminated against. This heartwarming sentiment earned Driving Miss Daisy an Oscar for Best Picture and another for Best Adapted Screenplay. But in its rush to please audiences, the film glossed over deep and difficult questions about the history of race in America, so much so that Morgan Freeman, who starred as a black chauffeur, later publicly remarked that the film was a, quote, big mistake. Lee similarly saw Driving Miss Daisy's emotional tidiness as a mistake, and the simple goal of do the right thing is to do the opposite. So unlike Driving Miss Daisy, Lee's script never tells us what to think about race, and it never allows us any feel-good moments where we congratulate ourselves for having it all figured out. Instead, Do the Right Thing wakes us up to how much thinking we've still got left to do. That's why it gives us both MLK and Malcolm X. And that's why the last thing we see before these two quotes is a dramatic scene between Sal, the owner of the now destroyed pizzeria, and Mookie, Sal's neighborhood delivery man. In this scene, Mookie goes to demand his salary from Sal, who's picking through the rubble of the pizzeria. And the scene begins by generating empathy from Mookie, who calmly reminds Sal that something much more important than the pizzeria was destroyed. Mookie says, "I also watched the cops murder Radio Raheem. You're gonna get it all from the fucking insurance anyway. Sal, you know the deal." And of course, Mookie is right. No building is worth more than a human life, especially when Sal hasn't really lost anything. He's fully insured. But Sal disagrees with Mookie's assessment, and he does so by making an equally powerful appeal to our hearts. Sal says, "This ain't about money. I could give a fuck about money. You see this fucking place? I built this fucking place with my bare fucking hands. Every light socket, every piece of tile, me with these fucking hands. You know what the fuck that means? For Sal, the pizzeria isn't just a building. It's a part of him. In fact, it's the most important part, because the soul of a man's body is his dreams. Take away his dreams, and he's worse than dead. So the scene makes us feel as strongly for Sal as we feel for Mookie, creating a moment of emotional confusion. How can two opposite things that we feel so strongly both be right? To sort out these conflicting feelings, we have to pause and think. We don't have one character defeating another like Skywalker defeats Vader in Star Wars. And we don't have two characters realizing they have something deep in common, like Rick and Renault at the end of Casablanca. Instead of these traditional Hollywood ways of resolving the conflict and leaving us content, Lee's script gives us two characters locked in an endless stalemate. After Mookie asks for his salary, Sal contemptuously chucks an extra $200 at Mookie, which Mookie equally contemptuously throws back. Keep it. You keep it. You keep it. You keep it. No, you keep it. You keep it. This state of unresolved emotional conflict is the alienation effect. Since the audience can't get emotional closure from the movie, they have to step back and think about how they want to resolve the conflict between Sal and Mookie themselves. At which point, the script then finds a way to alienate the audience even more profoundly. Sal and Mookie start discussing the weather, and for a moment, the script suggests a shared humanity between them. Sal and Mookie may have their differences, but they both feel the oppressive heat. It's a moment that feels like the end of Casablanca or Driving Miss Daisy. But then, abruptly, this sentimental connection is shattered because Mookie bends down and picks up the $100 bills that he's just thrown at Sal. This story beat always stuns first-time readers of the script. Didn't Mookie just take a principled stand by throwing the money in the gutter? Why on earth has he just picked up that money again? Is it because Mookie is poor and the poor have to compromise their ideals to survive? Or is it that Mookie is smart enough to see that money is the only kind of freedom in America? Or is it that Mookie is going to see his son and he wants to support his family? Any of those answers might be correct, or none of them might be. The point is simply that the ending of Do the Right Thing uses our feelings to carry us into situations that make us suddenly confused and uncomfortable, forcing us to ask questions that it doesn't answer. First, the ending makes us feel like we're one big America, and then it makes us feel estranged, pressing us to think deeper about it. That two-part action of stirring your audience's emotions and then confounding them is a powerful recipe for the alienation effect, and it can be used to encourage audiences to think critically about anything you want. So now, let's learn Lee's blueprint so that your next script can wake up the world. Even though the alienation effect is very different from the other cognitive effects we've explored in previous lectures, it's still engineered from the same four basic story components: story world, character, plot, and tone. And like all the other scripts we've studied, Do the Right Thing begins by establishing the story world. How do you reverse engineer a story world that encourages the alienation effect? Well, the premise of the alienation effect is that we live in an artificial world of propaganda and media fictions. So Do the Right Thing begins with a radio performance. And not just any radio performance, an incredibly cool radio performance.
Wake up! Wake up, wake up, wake up! Up you wake, up you wake, up you wake! This is Mr. Senior Love Daddy, your voice of choice. The world's only 12-hour strongman on the air here on We Love Radio 108 FM. The last on your dial, but first in your hearts, and that's the truth, Ruth. Here I am. Am I here? You know it. It you know. This is Mr. Senior Love Daddy doing the nasty to your ears to the nasty. Eyes only play the platters that matter, the matters they platter, and that's the truth, Ruth.
This starts out sounding like a call to revolution. Wake up, wake up, wake up. But quickly, the style overtakes the substance. It becomes more about the cleverness of wordplay and the intricacy of sound, the platters that matter, the matters they platter. This sounds stylish and cool, but it doesn't mean much, and by the time the DJ is telling us, that's the truth, Ruth, for the second time, it's starting to feel more like an artificial show than a wake-up call. So that's how the script establishes the world. It's a world of media patter that seems so smooth and so cool, and yet is really just an empty surface. And if you want to create your own alienating story world, you can follow Do the Right Thing's blueprint. Find the most convincingly cool piece of propaganda you can. Then let it play a few beats too long, so that it loses its gloss and its freshness, revealing its superficiality and making your audience suddenly question. Now, let's see how Do the Right Thing script establishes its characters, the hot and edgy individuals who conflict with the world's artificial cool. Do the Right Thing's main character is Mookie, although as we'll see in a moment, there's not the usual hierarchy between main and minor characters in this script. To maximize the alienation effect, it's much more of an ensemble piece. But with that caveat in place, we can see that the script introduces Mookie as the opposite of cool. He's revealed in a hot, steamy room that feels like the underbelly of the world. And his first action is to be an irritant. He slips over to a sleeping woman, tickling her lips to wake her up. And the sleeping woman is not amused. This is her only day to sleep in, and Mookie has ruined it. So the script immediately establishes Mookie in conflict with the world. The world goes out of its way to seem smooth and problem-free. Mookie goes out of his way to cause trouble. To emphasize Mookie's destructive potential, the script then adds a clever alienation effect by withholding the fact that Mookie is the sleeping woman's brother. We only learn of their sibling relationship after he's crawled into bed and played with her lips. So the first time you watch this scene, it has an almost erotic feel. And when the revelation of Mookie's true intention comes, it startles us out of our assumptions. Our feelings were telling us one thing about the scene, but they led us astray. They were wrong. Maybe we shouldn't trust our emotions so easily next time. So those are the big strokes of how Do the Right Thing introduces Mookie. But because this script is doing something radically different from a typical Hollywood script, there's more to its method than the usual Hollywood technique of introducing a main character in conflict with the world. For starters, Mookie isn't the first character introduced this way. Right after the DJ finishes setting the world, the script introduces Demare, who, like Mookie, is sweltering in a grimy, dark subterranean place. And also like Mookie, Demare is his own form of social irritant. He squabbles with the store clerk for not stocking his beer, he blocks Mother-Sister's view, and when the cops try to pump him for information, he resists, telling them only, "Those who'll tell don't know. Those who know won't tell." And after we meet Mookie and Demare, we meet other characters who disrupt the cool smoothness of the propaganda world. There's Radio Raheem, who walks everywhere with his music annoyingly loud. There's Tina, who busts up the traditional movie sentimentalism by admitting that even motherhood, that most sacred outcome of romantic love, hasn't made her happy or whole. There's even the Korean store clerk, who challenges everyone by declaring that he, too, is black. The big point here is that the script doesn't introduce just one or two characters who are in conflict with the world. It introduces many characters in conflict and shows them all experiencing the conflict with equal intensity, so none of them can be subordinated to each other. By doing so, it busts up the traditional Hollywood story of a hero who changes the system, because that story is part of the propaganda. The real truth is that we can't sit around dreaming of a good-looking caped crusader who'll save us. We have to wake up and realize that the only way to fix our problems is to join forces with other people who are in the same bind. The script then departs further from the usual Hollywood model in its depiction of the characters' motivations. As we saw in our introductory lectures, the key to getting audiences to empathize with characters is to reveal the characters' motives. But Do the Right Thing doesn't want to seduce us into the simple empathy of Hollywood sentimentalism. Instead, Do the Right Thing wants to alienate us, to make us feel the cracks and differences between ourselves and the characters. To do this, the script invests each character with a mix of motives. Some of these motives are rooted in deep and powerful fears that encourage empathy in the audience, but other motives seem happenstance and trivial. And as we've seen in previous lectures, whenever you juxtapose the deeply serious with the insubstantial, it generates an ironic implication of deeper secrets, prompting the audience to look for the hidden reasons for the character's behavior and to question whether the original empathy was deserved. Here's how this technique works with one of the script's most challenging characters, Buggin' Out. Buggin' Out calls for a boycott of Sal's Pizzeria because the customers are all black, but there are no photos of African Americans on the walls. So at this moment, Buggin' Out seems to be motivated by a desire to fight injustice. Yet the script prefaces Buggin' Out's call for a boycott with a scene in which he haggles with Sal for more cheese on his pizza. So the script suggests that maybe the thing that really sets off Buggin' Out is his anger at having to pay 50 cents for more extra cheese. Now, little provocations like this can be the spark of genuine revolutions. Rosa Parks was moved to resist over a bus seat because such daily humiliations can be how the system beats you down. But when Sal complains that Buggin' Out is just an idle troublemaker, and when Buggin' Out gets into an emptily theatrical display of outrage after a white man smudges his Air Jordans, the script makes the audience wonder whether Buggin' Out has any deep purpose in mind at all. He might be a genuine social activist, but he also might simply be reacting to the things that bug him. So the juxtaposition of his significant motives and his trivial ones makes the audience question, and nothing in the script ever provides a clear answer. The script forces us to interrogate Mookie's motives in the same way. By portraying Mookie as a nuisance, then as a hustler, then as a father, then as an opportunist, then as a social conscience, it makes us question, what's he fighting for? What does he most deeply believe? Does he throw the trash can through the pizzeria window as an act of protest? Or does he do it to channel the crowd's anger away from Sal so that no one else gets hurt? Does he even know himself? So unlike traditional Hollywood scripts, which carefully make us empathize with their characters, Lee's script keeps scrambling our feelings and pushing us away. It even scrambles our feelings for the story's main antagonist, Sal. As we've seen in earlier lectures, the antagonist is usually a physical embodiment of the story world's core rule. And when we first meet Sal, that's what he is, the human face of propaganda cool. Sal drives up to his pizzeria in his stylish car, wearing equally stylish clothes. And when conflict and raw emotion arise, Sal immediately smooths them over. After his son erupts, "I hate this fucking place. I detest it like a sickness," Sal coolly tamps down this hot emotion by saying, "This is a respectable business. Is there something wrong with that?" With that entirely rhetorical question, Sal restores the surface of the propaganda world. It's all chill and respectable here. No real questions allowed. But then the script blows Sal's cool apart, because Sal's final line in the scene is a heated cry from the hearts. "I'm gonna kill somebody today." So the antagonist has his own hot conflict with the story world, which makes us start to question, is anybody happy here? Is Sal in his own way a victim of the propaganda world? Or is he simply reaping what he's sown? There are too many clever ways in which Lee's script handles character for us to cover them all, but that's the big three-part blueprint that you can borrow for creating characters who have an alienation effect. First, create an ensemble of main characters, all of whom rupture the smooth, superficial cool of the propaganda world. Second, give your characters an ironic mix of heroic and ignoble motives, so the audience has to think it out themselves. And third, introduce an antagonist who seems to be the face of the world's propaganda cool, but is then himself revealed to hate it, so that even if viewers identify at first more with the antagonist than with the ensemble main characters, they quickly feel alienated too. Now, let's see how Lee's script reverse engineers its plot to encourage audiences to think. The classic method for using plot to create an alienation effect is laid out by Bertolt Brecht in his script Mother Courage and Her Children, which portrays the title character as she makes the same mistake over and over. Mother Courage lives in a world where money is everything, so every time she gets involved in a financial transaction, she haggles. And every time she haggles, another of her children dies. So even though the audience starts out feeling empathetic for Mother Courage's situation, the repetition of the same error again and again and again makes the audience start to experience it less emotionally and analyze it more critically. It's like if you have a friend who keeps making the same bad decision. At first, you're empathetic, But the more your friend keeps repeating the mistake over and over and over, the more your compassion is converted into exasperation, prompting you to step back critically and ask, why does this keep happening? And what can we change so that it stops happening? So that's how you reverse engineer plot to create an alienation effect. Instead of proceeding from point A to point B, you continually repeat plot point A over and over. A, until the audience gets restless, shakes off the illusion of the performance, and begins to actively question. That's why the ending of Do the Right Thing is so repetitive. Keep it, you keep it, you keep it, no, you keep it. Like a record skip that breaks the smooth flow and jolts you to get up and intervene. And the whole plot of Do the Right Thing is filled with identical loops, repeating the same basic story beats over and over. Radio Raheem walks around playing the same song, scene after scene. Bugging out picks one fight, drops it, moves on, and picks another, and drops it. DeMayer has one beer, and then another. Mookie delivers one pizza, then another, then another, then another. Sal keeps reminding all his customers that extra cheese is $2. DeMayer does something heroic, earning the attention of Mother Sister, until she reminds him, this changes nothing between you and me. People have conversations they've had before on other days with no new conclusions or epiphanies. Racial conflicts flare up, then die down, then flare up, then die down. Black customers fight with Korean store owners, and then leave, and then another fight happens. These mini dynamics constantly repeat themselves, building up restlessness and frustration. And even after the violence erupts and the pizzeria is destroyed, the story continues on unchanged. The block wakes up on another scorching day. Mookie goes to Sal and asks for his money. And the script ends with the DJ pattering on, telling us that the cash word of the day is chill. The story world, in other words, isn't going to change of its own accord. The plot will keep going round and round like one of Mr. Senior Love Daddy's records, unless we, the audience, wake up and start to question. As Mookie's sister Jade puts it, I don't mean to be disrespectful, but you can really direct your energies in a more useful way. So if you want to craft a plot that encourages your audience to direct their energies more usefully, try following Do the Right Thing's Brechtian blueprint. Give your audience a story where a negative situation repeats itself and repeats itself and repeats itself again and again and again and again and again and again and again until your audience's brains wake up and decide to critically intervene. So that's how Do the Right Thing uses story world, character, and plot to create an alienation effect. Now, how does it use tone? Well, since alienation is driven by an unresolved conflict within the audience, the tone of Do the Right Thing is reverse engineered to make the audience feel two conflicting things at once. Half the time, the tone of the script is matter-of-fact realism. The other half of the time, it's a heightened style that seems like a self-conscious performance. Each of these tones disrupts the other, making the audience wonder which one is true. Is this story the real deal, or just more Hollywood propaganda? So in Do the Right Thing's opening titles, Tina is at first shown in a dress, which feels more realistic, but then she's shown in boxing gloves, which is more of a costume performance, and then she's back in the dress, and then she's back in the boxing gloves. Or there's the introduction of Smiley. Wedged in between the sweaty, murky scenes of DeMayer and Mookie, Smiley is presented through a dramatic low-angle shot with heightened colors, shifting us into a sudden moment of hyper-stylization that makes us question the apparently more realistic tone that went before. Or there's how the script describes Mookie counting his bills in the opening scene. This isn't any ordinary counting of money. He's straightening out all the corners of the bills, arranging them so the bills, actually the dead presidents, are facing the same way. Here, the script's narrator does a little double take. Mookie's bills are bills, and then they're not. They're dead presidents. And that's how tone works throughout the script, always slipping into a smooth groove and then interrupting it, trying to bust up its own propaganda cool so that it pushes you to think. If you want to establish the same tone in your next script, you can follow Do the Right Thing and create a narrator that sees with two different God's eyes. One that sees the truth, and the other that sees a different, conflicting truth. Then speak both truths, like Malcolm X and MLK, showing your audience that the same cash money is also the presidential debt. Now that we've reverse engineered the nuts and bolts of Do the Right Thing story world, character, plot, and tone, let's flesh out the script's blueprint for alienation by looking at one of its key scenes in more granular detail. Do the Right Thing is filled with brilliant scenes that generate alienation, from the shocking destruction of the pizzeria to the moment where the characters break the fourth wall to spit racial slurs. But none of its scenes better creates a feeling of deep and unresolved emotion than the one where Sal gives a special slice to Mookie's sister. On the surface, nothing much seems to happen in this scene, because that's the story world of the script. On the surface, everything always seems cool. But underneath the propaganda chill is a violent collision of unresolved emotions. An older white man is making special food for a younger black woman, and then staring creepily as she eats it. How do we feel about that? Well, we feel unsettled. And our emotional discomfort is heightened by the way that the scene includes the family members of the older white male and the younger black woman. They see what's happening, but they feel powerless to speak up or intervene. And finally, in a classic Brechtian move, the scene ends with a line that tells us it's all going to happen again. Don't wait too long to come back. The plot is caught in a circle. Round and round, the same story will repeat itself again, unless we question what we've just seen. So that's Do the Right Thing's radical blueprint. It challenges the Hollywood consensus behind Casablanca and almost every other script we studied in this course. Because where this consensus encourages us to reform our world through feeling, Do the Right Thing insists that positive change requires us instead to shake off sentiment and reason critically. So which one is right? Casablanca or Do the Right Thing? Which one should be your screenwriting guide? Well, of course, the answer is both. If you want to prompt Do the Right Thing's effect of critical thinking in your audience, study Lee's script and learn from its blueprint. Write an unresolved ending, a superficial world, an ensemble of irritant characters with ironically mixed motives, a conflicted antagonist, a double-talking tone, and a circular plot filled with equally circular subplots that go round and round and round. And then go wake up, wake up, wake up the world. If you'd like to get started on your own alienation effect, here are 2 exercises you can try. First, plot a story where a character makes an understandable mistake, and then makes it again, and then makes it again, and then makes it again and again and again. Second, write a scene where a character is in conflict with an oppressive and unequal society, and give the character 2 motives for fighting that society. One of these motives more noble than the other. The script of Unforgiven took a very long time to make. For 15 years, it got rewritten over and over, becoming leaner and simpler, tougher and grittier, worn down by time, until only the hard center remained. And when Unforgiven was finally released in 1992, audiences immediately appreciated this old cowboy soul. Unforgiven became the 2nd highest grossing Western of all time, and it earned the Oscar for Best Picture and a nomination for Best Original Screenplay. So if you want to write a Western, Unforgiven is a great model to work from. But as we'll see in this lecture, it also offers a lesson in something bigger. And that's how to reclaim any story that Hollywood has left out in the cold. The world is full of classic genres that Hollywood's forgotten. Courtroom dramas, historical epics, political thrillers, Chaplin-esque emotional slapstick. People loved these old stories, and they can again, because like an old cowboy, they remain as true as ever at their core. So in this lecture, we'll examine how the script for Unforgiven revived the gritty soul of the Western, to give you a blueprint for bringing your own favorite lost story back. Following the classic method that we've been using for the past 14 lectures, let's reverse engineer Unforgiven. We'll start as always with the ending, attempting to isolate as precisely as possible its cognitive effect. So if you haven't watched Unforgiven or read the script, now's the time to hit pause and take a look. Unforgiven tells the story of reformed gunslinger William Money, who's sworn off his old ways of drinking and killing for his now departed wife, only to be lured back for one last murderous rampage to revenge a cut-up prostitute in Big Whiskey, Wyoming. In the last moments of Unforgiven's script, Money's silhouette walks towards his wife's grave at dusk, accompanied by a crawl of words. Some years later, Mrs. Ansonia Feathers made the arduous journey to Hodgman County to visit the last resting place of her only daughter. William Money had long since disappeared with the children, some said to San Francisco, where it was rumored he prospered in dry goods. And there was nothing on the marker to explain to Mrs. Feathers why her only daughter had married a known thief and murderer, a man of notorious vicious and intemperate disposition. So the script ends by posing a question. Why would a good woman marry William Money? Her mother never understands it. But at the end of the script, we in the audience feel that we do. Because although we've seen Money do terrible things, we've seen him do them to stop worse things from happening. So even though we know Money was a vicious and intemperate man, we found a hard redemption in him. He's a bad man, but he did a kind of good. With this ending, Unforgiven styles itself as an honest revival of the old truth of the American Wild West. This is the old truth hinted at by earlier Westerns like Gunsmoke and Dances with Wolves, which told their audiences that they were peeling back all the romantic myths about cowboys to expose the true toughness of life in the West. But although Gunsmoke and Dances with Wolves claimed to debunk the old fictions about the Wild West, they still clung hard to the hoary lie that the West was won by good-hearted men, men of justice and self-restraint. In Gunsmoke, the good-hearted man is U.S. Marshal Matt Dillon, who tries to reason with outlaws before he pulls his gun. In Dances with Wolves, the good-hearted man is Lieutenant John Dunbar, the white savior of the Sioux. But the ending of Unforgiven declares that the real truth of the Wild West is that everyone, even the so-called good guys, were cold-blooded killers. All that separated the good guys from the bad was where they pointed their guns. And if this is true, well, then the heroes of Westerns aren't heroes at all. Instead, they're anti-heroes. Unlike a regular hero, the anti-hero has a monster in his heart. And in his hands, he carries the same dark instruments as the bad guys. The only thing that absolves his behavior is that the people he murders are worse than he is. This view of the Wild West is painfully dark, but it's also deeply resonant. And that's because the anti-hero accomplishes something that no hero can. The anti-hero proves that good can come from bad. So the anti-hero makes us believe that no matter how grim the world gets, there's always hope that we can be redeemed. Because even if all the angels perish, we can still turn the devil's guns against him. That's the deep hope in the heart of the Western, that a thief and a murderer can steal and kill his way to something good. And this hope has touched human hearts so deeply that it's made the Western bigger than just the old Wild West. Dirty Harry is at its heart a Western. So are Nolan's Dark Knight movies. The Bourne trilogy has a Western core. Anytime you read an American tale about a fallen soul who gains redemption through an act of darkness, the Western influence is probably there. And the popularity of anti-heroes in American storytelling touches on something even deeper in the American psyche, the belief in second chances. This belief is one of America's founding myths, that someone can come to these shores and get a fresh chance, another shot at a life that didn't work out before. And so a great deal of American literature is engineered to make its audience believe again in something that the world has crushed down. Huck Finn, The Grapes of Wrath, To Kill a Mockingbird. The term for this cognitive effect is redemption. And even if you don't want to write a Western, this effect can help you resurrect your audience's belief in romance, or the Rust Belt, or justice, or the working class, or some other worn and battered thing. So let's turn back now to the script for Unforgiven and explore how it restores our faith in a broken down genre that the world long ago dismissed as an empty cliché. The script for Unforgiven begins its journey into redemption by establishing a thoroughly disenchanted story world. First, the script relates the story of a young woman who marries a brute and dies of smallpox. Then it introduces a whorehouse where an act of rough sex is interrupted by screams from the next room, where two men hold down a woman and cut her face with a hunting knife, threatening to do much worse, until at last the manager of the whorehouse puts a gun to their heads. What kind of story world is this? Well, it's a world of death and disease, a world where sex is an animal act, and where people cruelly butcher one another. And then things get even more cynical. The local sheriff, Little Bill, arrives and promises to dispense justice, prompting the owner of the whorehouse to complain that he's made a, quote, capital investment in his whores, and that his, quote, property has been damaged. Because who's going to pay, the owner demands, to sleep with a cut-up woman? You might think that Little Bill, being a man of justice and all, would object to a human life being reduced to a piece of property. But Little Bill wholeheartedly agrees with the owner of the whorehouse, declaring that justice can be done by exchanging one piece of property for another. And in this case, he reckons that a woman is worth 7 ponies. The other women react in horror to Little Bill's decision, but Little Bill responds by defending the women's attackers. They were just hard-working boys who were foolish, he says. They weren't given over to wickedness in a regular way. So to Little Bill, the men with the knife are actually more virtuous than the woman they cut. The men only occasionally do wicked things like damage property. But the woman, well, she's a whore who wallows in sin every day. So that's what passes for justice in this world. And it reveals that the core law of Unforgiven's story world is a deep and ugly dishonesty. Sure, Little Bill talks in lofty moral tones, but instead of enforcing justice, he excuses a horrific crime, sets the attackers free, and then blames the victims. Maybe he's a hypocrite, or maybe he just can't see beyond his own delusions. But either way, he's not an honest man. He's a wolf in sheriff's clothing. The deeper lesson here is that if you want to lead your audience into redemption, begin your script by introducing a story world where the belief you want to redeem is dead. This meets the audience in their current state of disenchantment, and it paints the grim consequences of living in a place where that belief is gone. In other words, give your audience a mirror scene. As we've seen in earlier lectures, mirror scenes are time-tested devices for engineering conversions. So when you want to convert your audience's minds to believe again in an old genre, use your story world to point the mirror out at their lives of broken down belief. After Unforgiven establishes its story world of dishonest men, it then introduces its anti-hero, William Money. Unforgiven's method for introducing an anti-hero is tremendously effective, so we'll cover it in detail so you can steal the blueprint. As you'll see, the blueprint has 3 main parts, which for clarity, we'll reverse engineer slightly out of order. The script introduces Money as he's wrangling pigs in the mud with his children, when he's approached by the bedraggled gunslinger, the Kid. The first thing the script tells us about Money is that he's remained true to his wife's memory. He's stuck with his kids and his hogs, doing his best to save the healthy by separating out the sick. And the script then emphasizes the remarkable nature of Money's new life by showing us that underneath, Money hasn't really reformed at all. Because a few beats later, it becomes clear that Money has been playing dumb in response to the kid's questions. Money knows exactly what the kid is talking about. He just pretends otherwise in case the kid is an assassin. With this, the script reveals that the cunning old thief and murderer still lives in Money. Honesty isn't automatic to him. It's just that he wakes up every morning determined to work on it. So Money's conflict with the story world isn't that he's good and the world is bad. It's that the story world is bad and won't admit it, while Money is bad and tries to grapple honestly with the consequences. Instead of being like Little Bill and pretending to be good and wise, Money acknowledges that he's an animal inside. He knows he belongs down in the mud with the swine, and that's why the script introduces him there. By juxtaposing Money and Little Bill in its opening scenes, Unforgiven's script lays out the first and third steps of its three-step blueprint for establishing an anti-hero. The first step is for you to introduce a false hero like Little Bill. Because if you want audiences to put their faith in a self-proclaimed bad man who does good, it helps to start by showing them a self-proclaimed good man who does bad. The third step is for you to introduce your anti-hero as a character who accepts the fallen ways of the world. Unlike a true hero, the anti-hero doesn't try to change the disenchanted rule of the story world. He accepts its tragic necessity and tries to repurpose it for good. In the case of Unforgiven, the story world is a place of dishonest men, so Money is introduced by telling a lie. But crucially, that lie is a deception told to protect the two children Money has standing there. So it's the bad rule of the world repurposed to good effect. Those are the first and the third steps for creating an anti-hero, and the second step can be found in the scene between the introductions of Little Bill and Money. In that scene, Alice and the women of the whorehouse decide to get the justice that Little Bill has denied them. This scene crisply establishes the women of the whorehouse as anti-heroes by showing that the money they count is the currency of a fallen world, an insight into all the dirty things they've done. When Faith reveals she has twice as much money as anyone else, Alice remarks, "Jesus, Faith, you've been giving Skinny something special?" The more cash the women have, the more unspeakable the acts they've done, which is to say that the women have been engaged in their own form of dishonesty. They've acted in ways they haven't admitted, even to each other, aligning them with the tragic rule of their fallen story world. Yet this scene also reveals that the women's dishonesty serves a good cause. They're banding together to resist Little Bill and get justice. So like Money, the women of the whorehouse are liars and cheats in the service of something bigger than themselves, making them anti-heroes too. Why does Unforgiven give us these minor anti-heroes when it's just about to introduce its major anti-hero in William Money? Well, the screenwriting reason is that if you want to establish one compelling anti-hero, it helps to have multiple anti-heroes. Because anti-heroes have to fight for something bigger than themselves. And in a fallen world, that bigger thing can't be a genuine good. It has to be a better bad, like other anti-heroes. So that's the three-step blueprint for introducing an anti-hero that you can steal from Unforgiven. First, introduce a false hero, a Little Bill, a man who talks like virtue but walks like vice. Second, introduce a group of minor anti-heroes who resist the false hero. And third, have your main anti-hero come to assist those minor anti-heroes, bringing them into conflict with your Little Bill. So now, let's turn to the plot. How would we reverse engineer a story that debunks all the old Western myths, except the myth of the bad man who does good? Well, we'd begin like an episode of Gunsmoke, with a clear injustice, a wrong to be righted. But then we'd reverse engineer an alteration to the classic Western plot by showing the futility of heroism to correct the wrong. This change prepares the way for the anti-hero by making it clear that there is no alternative. Heroism has been attempted, and it has failed, leaving the world at the mercy of false heroes. And this is exactly what Unforgiven does. It begins with a clear injustice, the cutting of Delilah's face, that kicks off a classic Western storyline, the hunt for fugitives that culminates in a showdown. And then the script shows the futility of heroism by having Money act good and accomplish no good. First, the sober and noble-minded Money gets savagely beaten by Little Bill. Then he falls into a delirium and thinks of heaven. Then he admits that he doesn't want to kill anyone. So the script shows us money on his best behavior. And it also shows that his best behavior doesn't make the world any better, making the audience slowly wish that money would drop his good guy routine and start to act a little more bad. Then, to feed the audience's desire to see more of the bad William Money, the script ramps up the dark actions of the false heroes. And to kick off those dark actions, it introduces English Bob. English Bob embodies all the old Western legends by having a hack writer follow him around to mythologize his achievements. And then English Bob is sacrificed by the script to build up an even bigger fraud, Little Bill. Because Little Bill viciously beats down English Bob and steals Bob's writer to mythologize his own lies. This is the old writing trick of having one shark get swallowed by another shark. That's how you know the second shark is really bad. He snacks on other predators. So English Bob's plot function is to be the false hero defeated by an even nastier false hero, intensifying the deep crisis of the story world's dishonesty and increasing the audience's urgent belief that money needs to take action to fix it. Once the script has established Little Bill as the walking embodiment of the old lies, it then amplifies his crimes by having him commit another horrific injustice. He kills and tortures Money's old partner, Ned, and claims it as an act of law and order. With this story beat, the script tells us the longer that Money keeps his hands clean and the longer that Little Bill is allowed to swagger unchecked, the more innocents will die. The only way to fix things is for the anti-hero to stop trying to do good by acting good. Instead, he needs to do good by once again acting bad. And only now, after the script has convinced us of this hard truth, in the closing beats of the story, does it give us back the anti-hero we've been craving. But Money isn't the anti-hero we've been hoping for. He's much, much worse. He does horrific things. He is a true monster. He kills in a haze of drunkenness, later remarking, "I've always been lucky when it comes to killing folks." And he doesn't just defeat the antagonist in a shootout. He executes Little Bill in cold blood, while Little Bill lies wounded and defenseless on the floor. And as Money kills Little Bill, he dispenses with the notion that what he's doing is justice. As he says, deserves got nothing to do with it. Then, as Money is walking out, he cruelly murders another wounded man. And Money's behavior becomes even more ugly from here, because when the killing is done, Money gets anxious. He bullies his way past terrified civilians with empty threats and doesn't stop to bury his friend. Instead, he hastily rides out of town before he can die. This is as unheroic as you can get. There's nothing redeeming in Money's actions. They combine the worst, most animal impulses: cruelty, blind fury, fear. Yet we recognize that their result is to make the world a little less bad. An innocent man has been avenged. A tyrant has been killed. And so, without varnish or false sentiment, the anti-hero is redeemed. The honest truth is that Money is a bad, bad man. But the world is better for him. The broader model here is one that you can use in plotting any genre reboot. Begin by identifying the core myth of the genre. So, for example, in courtroom dramas, it's the one honest man. Or in romantic comedies, it's true love. Then, dismantle every one of the genre's familiar cliches while ruthlessly withholding that one core myth, refusing to give it to your audience until they scream out for it to save them. And then, don't just give us the myth. Give it to us double-barreled. Give us a juror who's so truthful it hurts our souls. Give us an act of true love so generous that it ends in a shocking self-sacrifice. Give us an old cowboy who murders in cold blood to make the world a better place. As we saw in our introductory lectures, Unforgiven adopts a special kind of God's eye narrator who values the worldly feelings of the mortals below. This is a narrator who looks into brothels and pig farms. And here's how it pulls back the curtain on money as he sets off on his quest for justice. This is a stunningly intimate look at our hero's most private moments. And the script, in fact, explicitly describes money as embarrassed. But unlike an ironic narrator who would make money's sexual non-exploits simply ridiculous, and unlike a sentimental narrator who would make them deeply poignant, the God's Eye just records it as matter of fact. This is the emotional truth of how humans are. And the narrator continues to show the unvarnished reality of being a cowboy when a man starts shooting at Ned and Money ends up on the ground, his face bloodied. But not because Money was hit by a rival gunslinger. He just banged his head, falling off his horse. And then the narrative reveals that the man shooting was the kid, who's so blind that he didn't realize it was Money, and anyway was never a threat because he can't hit the side of a barn. These are the things the script chooses to tell us. And by convincing us that it never draws a veil or shies away from the truth, no matter how ugly or squalid that truth might be, the script invests itself with its own aura of integrity. So that when the audience sees a glimmer of good in the actions of an old cowboy or a woman living in sin, no matter how faint that glimmer might seem, we can trust it's not a fantasy. It's the God's honest truth. So if you want your script to create a feeling of redemption in audiences, you'll want to use this kind of God's Eye narrator too. It'll show your audience the depth of the world's disenchantment, seeing into the darkest corners of a story world without belief. But it'll also remind them that not everything's lost, because there's still a God around to see. Now that we've reverse engineered Unforgiven's story world, character, plot, and tone, let's flesh out the script's blueprint for redemption by looking at two of its key scenes in more granular detail. As we've seen, the script's two-part recipe for redemption begins by demolishing the old cliches. So let's look at the script's legendary demolition of the old cowboy fantasies in the jailhouse scene where Little Bill reads Beauchamp's saga of English Bob. This brief exchange is a masterclass in myth-busting. All it takes is Little Bill's dry misreading of the duck for Duke, and the whole legend of English Bob dissolves into absurdity. At the same time, the scene also perfectly models how to set up a false hero like Little Bill. At the start of the scene, Little Bill seems to be in conflict with the world. That is, he seems to be a hero. After all, the rule of Unforgiven's story world is dishonesty. But Little Bill goes on to tell the true story of what really happened to Two Gun, how Bob shot first and missed because he was drunk, how Two Gun capped himself in the foot and had his gun explode, and how Bob then proceeded to murder an unarmed man by plugging him in the liver. Except, of course, there's one thing Little Bill leaves unsaid. And that's the truth about what Little Bill himself did in that saloon while Bob was slowly shooting Two Gun through the liver. Little Bill never reveals why he didn't stand up or intervene. He never admits that he was too scared or too drunk or too unprincipled to try to stop the killing. And so Little Bill fails the real litmus test for honesty. Honesty doesn't mean telling the truth about others. That's easy. The hard thing is to tell the truth about your own ugly failings. And on that front, Little Bill is entirely silent. With this careful omission, the scene reveals Little Bill is not really in conflict with the world. He's just another symptom of its self-delusions. That's why he's beaten down English Bob and is now mocking him. Not to satisfy justice, but to satisfy his own ego and his own lust for power and authority. So the big lesson here is how to introduce a false hero. Set up the story world and have the false hero verbally announce his opposition to it, but then depict him in fact behaving in total congruence with the story world, so that his actions reveal what his words deny. He is the antagonist. Now that we've seen a scene that pulls down the old myths, let's look at a scene that illustrates the second and final part of the script's recipe for redemption, the doubling down on the one true myth. And there's no better example of this than the moment where Money talks to Delilah, the woman cut up in the brothel. Money begins by wallowing in his own fears. I thought I was gone. I thought I was dying for sure. So like everyone else in this story world, Money admits that his primary concern is his own animal needs. The focus of all his thoughts was on his own survival. But instead of making Money angry or desperate or cruel, this worldly self-interest makes Money see something bigger than himself. As he says, I wouldn't normally pay no notice to high country like this. Trees. But I sure notice them now. So out of Money's selfish fear of dying comes a glimpse of something greater. Out of bad comes good. And the remainder of the scene then deepens this action of good from bad when Delilah nervously offers Money a free one, which Money declines, prompting Delilah to blush. Delilah's dialogue here reestablishes the story world of the script as a world of animal desires and free advances, a world where men see only surface things, until Money reveals that he does see the deep beauty inside her, just like he sees it in the trees. So for a moment, Money seems almost heroic. And then the script reminds us of who Money really is. Because to avoid either sleeping with Delilah or hurting her feelings, Money lies. When Money mentions his wife, Delilah thinks he means that his wife is still alive. So Money dishonestly tells Delilah that, yeah, his wife is back in Kansas, watching over his young ones. So once again, Money doesn't challenge the tragic rule of the world's dishonesty. Instead, he lives by it. But what makes Money an anti-hero and not a villain is that he doesn't follow Little Bill in using the lies of the world for his own craven gain. Instead, he repurposes the world's dishonesty for a social cause, putting the hearts of both Delilah and his dead wife at peace. And with that, the scene shows you how to double down on the old myth of the anti-hero. Give us a man whose selfish fear of death opens his eyes to the greater life without. Give us a man who turns the bad rule of the world into an unexpected kind of good. So that's how Unforgiven makes us feel redemption. And it gives you a blueprint for redeeming any time-worn stories you want. Strip away all their cheap cliches and double down on the one hard legend at their center. Because that's how you make the world believe again in something old. You kick off the rust and the layers of mud to reveal the true original beneath. If you'd like to write a script that resurrects a lost story, here's a two-part exercise you can try. First, do a survey of your favorite old movie genre. Maybe it's sports films, or screwball comedies, or superhero flicks, or teen horror movies. Then make a list of every cliché in the genre, every character trait and plot point that gets recycled again and again. Now select one cliché on that list to redeem, the one you think is really true, the one you want to make us all believe in once again. Second, write a scene that demolishes one of the old clichés you want to debunk, but redeems the core myth that you want to keep. Then don't just keep that myth. Give it to us double. Pulp Fiction ushered in the indie movie revolution of the 1990s. It became the first independent film to gross over $100 million at the American box office, and it went on to earn an Oscar for its two screenwriters, Quentin Tarantino and Roger Avary, paving the way for indie cinema to go mainstream. Except for one little problem. which is that the whole idea of indie film is that it's a space to do different things, to experiment, to break traditional Hollywood molds. It isn't a single rigid formula that can be churned out in large quantities. And since that's the case, then how could we or anyone else follow the path that was blazed by Pulp Fiction? Isn't it just an example of the free spirit of an independent creative mind, something that has no precedent and that can have no imitator? The answer, as we'll explore in this lecture, is not really. To start with, although Pulp Fiction is different from most other indie films, it has its own clear cognitive purpose. So if you want to make films that have the same psychological effects as Pulp Fiction, you can borrow its blueprint just like you can borrow the blueprint of any script. Second, Pulp Fiction wasn't spontaneously hatched from the brains of its writers. Its core story techniques are derived from a clearly defined artistic tradition that stretches back to the early 20th century. Which is to say that, like most scripts, Pulp Fiction is less an exercise in radical originality than in carefully drawing on precedent. Its twist is that its particular precedent happens to be from outside the Hollywood mainstream. So if you're a fan of an artistic tradition that's unknown or underrepresented in Hollywood, Pulp Fiction can offer a blueprint for connecting that tradition to mainstream cinema audiences. It provides, in effect, the opposite of what we got in our last lecture from studying Unforgiven. Instead of giving us a method for making old stories feel fresh, it provides a blueprint for making new stories feel accessible. So over the next 30 minutes, we'll explore how the script for Pulp Fiction made the avant-garde go pop, so you can kickstart an indie revolution too. To reverse engineer Pulp Fiction's indie blueprint, let's start like we always do, identifying the special cognitive effect of its ending as precisely as we can. So if you haven't seen Pulp Fiction or read its script, now's the time to hit pause and enjoy it. Pulp Fiction chronicles the adventures of a pair of Los Angeles hitmen, Vincent and Jules, who are sent on various errands like retrieving a briefcase and escorting the boss's wife, Mia, before they witness a minor robbery in a coffee shop and then go their separate ways. One to walk the earth for God, the other to get killed on another petty criminal mission. The script ends with Vincent and Jules leaving the coffee shop like this. To the amazement of the patrons, the waitresses, the cooks, the busboys, and the manager, these two badass dudes wearing UC Santa Cruz and I'm with stupid t-shirts, swim trunks, thongs, and packing .45 automatics walk out of the coffee shop together without saying a word. Okay, so what's that ending all about? On a literal level, there are two men. One is about to be dead, and the other has just seen the light. They're wearing swim trunks and crazy t-shirts, and they stuff guns into their waistbands. And then they step out into the sunshine with a mysterious briefcase. Make sense? Not when I put it like that, but it does feel like it makes a kind of crazy sense when you've read the whole script. And to see why, let's pause our discussion of this scene for a moment and go back to the script's other endings. Because the script is broken into 3 discrete chapters, each with its own conclusion. The first chapter ends with Mia and Vincent shaking hands and sharing a private joke. The second chapter ends with 2 former enemies hugging and saying, "So we cool? Yeah, man, we're cool." And the third chapter ends with 4 desperados getting together for a group photo. What do all these endings have in common? They're moments of friendship. Friendship is a particular kind of togetherness. It's not a logical togetherness like the one you share with business associates and financial partners. And it's not a desire-driven togetherness like the one you share with romantic partners. Instead, the bond is like those 2 guys standing in swim trunks and corny t-shirts, packing guns and holding a briefcase. It makes sense, but you had to be there. Because friendships are built up through a series of seemingly random events that in the end become the deep meaning of your life. The strange nights, the weird adventures, the things that you can't explain to anybody else. These offbeat experiences become in time the stuff of shared legend, the things that matter most, not because of what you did, but because of who you did them with. Careers start and careers end. Lovers come and lovers go, but your friends are there forever. So to experience the end of Pulp Fiction is to feel like we've just made a friend. It's not logical, and it doesn't touch us sentimentally like a romantic comedy. Instead, it fills us with a goofy sense of exuberance like we just got back from a college road trip. It was completely haphazard and utterly life-affirming. There are many different ways that stories can communicate a feeling of friendship. Pulp Fiction does so in a particularly bold way, because to emphasize both the unreason and the eternity of its friend connections, the script's final scene of the two hitmen in flip-flops employs an artistic technique named collage, which has its roots in a 20th century art movement known as surrealism. Back when surrealism first emerged in 1920s Europe, it seemed like the world had come apart. A few years earlier, the Great War had smashed the supposedly rational civilizations of the West against each other, killing millions for no purpose. And in the wake of the destruction, art lost its mind. In movements like Dadaism, artists reacted to the collapse of the old civilized certainties by suggesting that life was illogical, incomprehensible, absurd. Nothing made sense anymore. But soon, artists began to yearn for something more substantial than blind chaos. They didn't want to go back to the old debunked truths of logic and rationality, but they did want to find something that could reconnect the world into a more lasting, even eternal sense of meaning. One way they did this was by returning to sentimentalism, which we discussed back in our lecture on Casablanca. A second way was by developing an ethical stance that would later become known as existentialism, which we'll explore in our lecture on Fargo. And a third way was by founding surrealism. Surrealism was defined in different ways by different surrealists, and it influenced a wide variety of later pop artists who understood it differently. But for the purposes of understanding Pulp Fiction and its use of collage, the key feature of surrealism is its effort to locate the deep pattern of life in something other than emotion or reason. That something other is the imagination, which the surrealists associated with the unconscious and with dream. The surrealists developed many forms of art to reconnect audiences to the free associative dream unity of our unconscious imagination. But none of the surrealist techniques was more influential than collage. In a collage, different scraps of pulp culture are arranged into a striking new whole. Cuttings from newspaper ads might be juxtaposed with magazine engravings or ticket stubs or photos to create unexpected moments of imaginative togetherness. You can get a sense of collage's power to lend a dream coherence to pop culture in Hannah Hawk's Untitled, Kurt Schwitter's On Morn, and Robert Rauschenberg's Signs. And you can get a personal sense of how collage works by looking through a scrapbook of photos of your friends. Seemingly random fragments of life come together to reveal a deeper sense of imaginative connection. Pulp Fiction brilliantly employs this same technique in the final beat of its script. That beat is filled with scraps of pop culture, the I'm with Stupid t-shirts, the gangsters, the briefcase, and the other cheesy genre cliches. Yet these scraps don't feel random. They're carefully arranged into an imaginative pattern that makes them feel at one with each other. Like a crazy night out with your friends, none of it makes logical sense, but the pieces all fit together. That's friendship. That's surreal connection. That's our salvation in this irrational world of cultural fragmentation. And that's the cognitive effect that Pulp Fiction wants to communicate. So now, let's break the script down and see how it gets our minds to recover the imaginative togetherness of our unconscious dreams. Although Pulp Fiction is an indie script, it starts out in traditional fashion by establishing the core rule of its story world. In the opening scene, we meet a young man and a woman in a Los Angeles coffee shop. The man, we're told, is English, and like his fellow countrymen, smokes cigarettes like they're going out of style. The woman, we're told, is impossible to place. Everything she does contradicts something she did. So immediately, the script establishes a story world whose rule is that meaning has disintegrated into tiny subcultures, where the English have their own random quirks, and Los Angeles has its own idiosyncratic breakfast routines. In other words, this story world is like Europe after the Great War. It's a place of fracture and absurdism that predates the imaginative connections of surrealist collage. The result of this fragmentation is that it's impossible to achieve a global sense of what anything means. That's why we can't fathom the woman. We have no broader context for interpreting her. This fragmentation of meaning is then hammered home through the dialogue that follows.
Forget it. It's too risky. I'm through doing that shit.
You always say that. Same thing every time. I'm through. Never again. Too dangerous.
I know that's what I always say. I'm always right, too.
You forget about it in a day or two.
The days of me forgetting are over. The days of me remembering have just begun.
You know, when you go on like this, what you sound like?
I sound like a sensible fucking man.
You sound like a duck. Quack, quack, quack.
The first time we read Pulp Fiction's script or watch the movie, we have no idea what these two characters are talking about. What's too risky? What does the man never want to do again? What the hey is going on? And yet, to the young man and the young woman, this is their normal reality. They always have this conversation. They say the same thing every time. So with this dialogue, the script dramatizes the crisis that surrealism emerged to address. This is a story world broken into fragments that make no sense to each other. So when we listen in on other people's lives, it's all quack, quack, quack. We hear the sounds, and we have no idea what they mean. This same world rule is then reestablished at the start of the script's chapter 1. Once again, the script presents us with two people in conversation. This time, it's Jules and Vincent. They're in suits and ties and driving an old white Chevy Nova because they're part of a random subculture of West Coast gangsters who apparently roll like that. Jules and Vincent then proceed to have a long conversation about how different things are in Amsterdam. In Amsterdam, Vincent tells Jules it's legal to smoke or sell hash in certain designated places. But for some reason, it's still illegal to carry hash. But that doesn't matter because for some other reason, it's illegal for the cops to search you. Amsterdam, in other words, also exists as its own haphazard subculture. They use the metric system. They let you walk into a movie theater and buy a beer. And also, they eat mayo on their fries. Some of these differences seem good to Jules and Vincent. Some of them seem weird or wrong, because the script isn't trying to suggest that one way of life is better or more sensible than another. Instead, the script is reinforcing the core rule of its story world, which is that modern life is busted up into little subcultures that don't make sense to one another. From the eccentric couple in the Los Angeles coffee shop, to the gangsters in the Chevy Nova, to the Amsterdammers eating fries with mayonnaise, modern life has become broken apart into chaotic fragments, like random cuttings from pop culture strewn randomly everywhere. The bigger screenwriting lesson here is that if you want to convert your audience to a new aesthetic like surrealist collage, begin by establishing a story world that suffers from the cultural crisis that the new aesthetic was invented to remedy, attuning your audience to the need for a heroic artistic intervention. Now let's see how Pulp Fiction's script establishes its characters in conflict with this pre-surrealist story world of chaos and absurdity. Critics sometimes complain that Pulp Fiction's characters are less than fully realized. Instead of feeling like multidimensional humans, individuals like Mia and Vincent and Jules and the young woman seem oddly flat and even cartoonish. But to take this view of the characters in Pulp Fiction is to misunderstand how characters work, both in screenwriting and in surrealism. To begin with how characters work in screenwriting. As we've seen, scripts from Oedipus to Hamlet to Casablanca to The Princess Bride all establish character through conflict with the story world, which is exactly what Pulp Fiction does. Specifically, Pulp Fiction introduces its characters in conflict with the nihilist fragmentation of its story world by portraying these characters as they create deeper moments of imaginative connection. Here's how the young man does it in the script's opening scene. The young man begins by laying out some traditional thievery schemes, from robbing banks to robbing liquor stores, and then he cuts and pastes bits of these standard larceny plots into a creative new vision, robbing restaurants. So like a surrealist artist, the young man chops up some scraps of modern culture and imaginatively sticks them together into a new pattern. And when the resulting criminal collage is presented to the young woman, it instantly connects with her. "I love you, pumpkin," she coos. "I love you, honey bunny," he replies. The following section of the script, Chapter 1, is crammed with similar moments of imaginative connection by Jules and Vincent. Perhaps most famously when Jules cuts and pastes Ezekiel's Old Testament, "And you will know my name is the Lord," onto his and Vincent's payback killing. And although this biblical fragment is torn from an entirely different historical time and place, the imaginative force of the association is so powerful that it prompts Jules and Vincent to open fire at, quote, the same time, bringing them suddenly together. These moments of imaginative connection abound in Pulp Fiction's script because the characters are always trying to take the cultural detritus around them and collage it into new works. These collages can take on endless forms that are as rich as the human imagination and the experiences of dream. But one thing they all have in common is that they're not private instances of meaning. When we discuss Fargo in a later lecture, we'll explore the power of private meanings of existentialism. But surrealist collages are profoundly different from existential meanings, because in a surrealist collage, imaginative associations are always shared. They bring characters together as friends who suddenly appreciate a deeper connection. That's why the characters of Pulp Fiction come in pairs, like the young man and the young woman, and Jules and Vincent. Against the absurdist disintegration of the story world, these characters find surreal collages together. So contrary to the objections of critics, the characters of Pulp Fiction are carefully and appropriately constructed in conflict with the story world. And in fact, the very qualities of Pulp Fiction's characters to which critics have objected are what make these characters appropriately surreal. If you read the surrealist-influenced fiction of writers like William S. Burroughs or Alice Carter or Gabriel Garcia Marquez or Salman Rushdie, you'll notice that their characters can also lack a certain psychological depth, instead feeling more like cultural fragments or snapshots from a dream. Because even when surrealist fiction successfully resists the disintegration of our postmodern condition, it doesn't return the world to roundness. Instead, just like a collage, it celebrates the deep imaginative connections to be found in torn-up shreds of pop culture when they're pasted onto a flat canvas. So criticizing Pulp Fiction's characters for feeling one-dimensional is like criticizing a duck for going quack. That's the sound that a sensible young duck is going to make. And the bigger screenwriting take-home here is not to get waylaid by supposedly universal aesthetic criteria like the need for well-rounded characters. Because if you want to write an indie script like Pulp Fiction, you have to be prepared to follow the logic of your own revolutionary aesthetic, even if it breaks the art world's unbreakable rules. So now, let's talk about plot. Just like Pulp Fiction's story world and characters, its plot seems highly unusual at first, but it's reverse engineered in the same way that all Hollywood scripts are. The only difference is that it's reverse engineered to produce the cognitive effect of surreal connection. So to recover the logic of Pulp Fiction's plot, let's retrace the screenwriter's steps and ask ourselves, if we wanted to create the cognitive effect of a surrealist collage, how would we reverse engineer that as a plot? Well, first, we'd create a completely traditional pulp story. Then we'd cut it up into scraps and rearrange them into an imaginative collage. And then, at the end of our collage narrative, we'd return to where our narrative started, leaving the audience with an experience of shared connection. And this is exactly what the screenwriters of Pulp Fiction did to create the plot. They started with a classic, linear, pulp gangster tragedy about Vincent and his various escapades. Vincent retrieves a briefcase for his boss, then accidentally shoots a man and has to go to the Wolf to get the mess cleaned up. Then he ends up in a coffee shop while it's being robbed, then goes to take care of a double-crossing boxer, and then gets killed by the boxer, who keeps the pulp serial going by embarking on his own adventure. Then, having created this classic linear story, the screenwriters broke it up into fragments that they then rearranged into a surrealist collage. This out-of-order collage prompts us in the audience to keep making imaginative connections between the different plot lines ourselves. Again and again, narrative threads come together in our mind, generating sudden bursts of unity. And this surreal effect is powerfully reinforced when the narrative ends where it began, back in the robbery of the LA coffee shop. To come back to this scene is to suddenly understand all the plot beats you didn't get before. The world is the same postmodern scrapyard as it always was, but you've gained an imaginative connection of how it all goes together. You started out alone, but you've gained new friends by going on the same strange trip with them, discovering the deep imaginative patterns in what initially seemed like chaos. Even Vincent is back now with us from the grave, because to the imagination, today and yesterday are one. So the big lesson here is that the way to write a surrealist plot is to start by writing any regular genre plot. Then cut it into pieces and arrange it into a collage, making sure that the final story fragment completes the first fragment, so that your plot ends on a note of coming together. Let's turn now to tone. At first, the tone of pulp fiction seems all over the place. It's a mashup of different pulp genres, by turns poetic and harsh, violent and philosophical, nightmarish and absurd. But there is an overall consistency, a gestalt that binds the whole together. And that binding is the tone that the surrealists found in Dream. Dreams can go all over the place. They can drift from gentleness to horror in an instant, and yet they always have that same special dreamlike feel. So how do you create that special dream feel in writing? Well, the secret recipe lies in the transitions between different tonal moments. The surrealists celebrated these transitions as the deep logic of the unconscious imagination. One moment of a dream led seamlessly into the next because there was a buried psychological consistency beneath it. And Pulp Fiction operates in the same way. Although the script mixes together all sorts of different pulp fragments, its narrator maintains a consistent tone by smoothing out the transitions between them. The major way the narrative smooths these transitions is through its use of odd couples. Because no major shifts of tone ever happen to one character alone. They always happen to two strange friends at once. And the friends discuss the change as it happens. And as the friends talk about it, they reinforce the connection by continually repeating each other's words. For example, you know what you sound like? I sound like a sensible fucking man. You sound like a duck. Or, my little black medical book. I never saw no medical book. Or, what about a dog? I don't eat dog either. Yeah, but you consider a dog to be a filthy animal? I wouldn't go so far as to call a dog filthy. By recycling each other's words over and over, the characters bind each moment to the next, so that their odd couple conversations become the thread that stitches the whole collage together. This tone of strange friendship binds together even the most shockingly bizarre moments of the script, like the legendarily surreal Bring Out the Gimp moment. 1 minute, the enraged crime boss Marcellus is chasing the double-crossing boxer Butch through the sunny streets of Los Angeles. The next, they take a wrong turn into nightmare, ending up in a hillbilly pawnshop dungeon. But crucially, Butch and Marcellus go through this dreamscape transition together. And in the same way, they're not tortured by a single nightmare monster. They're tortured by two friends who have their own private language, which goes like this.
Is Grace going to be okay in front of this place?
Yeah, it ain't Tuesday, is it?
No, it's Thursday.
And she'll be fine.
Bring out the Gimp.
I think the Gimp's sleeping.
Well, I guess you'll just wake him up then, won't you?
Wake up!
Who is Grace? What's the difference between Tuesdays and Thursdays? Why is there a Gimp asleep underneath a trapdoor? To these guys, it just makes sense because it's their shared reality. And so even though this is a moment of inscrutable weirdness verging on horror, the tone of the script is always the same. It's a conversation between two strange friends who recycle each other's words. The Gimp, wake 'em up, wake up. Giving it the same surreal tone as every other beat of every other scene and blending into one continuous dream. So if you want to create a surreal tone in your writing, this is a great technique to steal. Smooth the transitions between your collage fragments by having them experienced simultaneously by two characters who blend together into one by talking the same. Now that we've reverse engineered the nuts and bolts of Pulp Fiction's story world, character, plot, and tone, let's flesh out the script's blueprint for surreal connection by tackling one thorny question that we've so far ignored. How does Pulp Fiction's indie aesthetic draw audiences in? Traditional Hollywood movies engage audiences by using two big devices: empathy for the characters and suspense generated by the plot. But surrealism weakens both of these normal narrative hooks by giving us interchangeable characters and dream stories that soften the stakes and give the endings away. So to solve this story problem, let's reverse engineer. We want our audience to go on the same strange journey as our characters. So we have to make the audience's brains undergo the same cognitive trip as our characters. And since we can't use our normal trick of sympathetic identification to do that, we have to engineer each scene on 2 levels at once. On the first level, we'll have the plot journey taken by the characters in the script, which is a movement from nihilism to surreal togetherness. And on the second level, we'll layer in extra story structures that are specifically designed to guide the audience's mind on the same journey in parallel, shocking their brains into nihilism and then dreaming their brains into imaginative connection, so the audience ends up walking with the characters into surreal friendship side by side. This double layering of story structure is exactly what Pulp Fiction's script does. To see it in action, let's look at the infamous accidental shooting scene. In this scene, Jules has just had a religious conversion, coming to believe that God intervened and stopped bullets from killing him. Vincent is skeptical, and holding his .45 casually, he turns to Marvin, the guy in the back of the car, to ask his opinion.
Marvin, what do you make of all this?
Man, I don't even have an opinion.
You gotta have an opinion. I mean, you think God came down from heaven and stopped, bang!
What the fuck's happening?
Oh man, I shot Marvin in the face.
Why the fuck you do that?
I didn't mean it.
So in the world of the story, Vincent and Marvin are spiraling into nihilism because one of them has found religion while the other hasn't. They're coming apart, like the post-modern world. And then, bang, the unexpected gunshot plunges the audience into the same experience of shock and chaos. So instead of just witnessing Vincent and Jules transition into a state of mental fragmentation, the audience viscerally undergoes that journey into disorientation too. The lesson here is that if you want to create the same surreal effect as Pulp Fiction, you have to introduce sharp shocks like the unexpected gunshot into your script. Shocks that come without warning, blowing apart the story world and making your audience feel a total death of meaning. I know it sounds sadistic, but it's really not. Because the cognitive precondition for surreal connection is the feeling that all reason has been blown apart. And so to put your audience in the right frame of mind to get surreal, you have to give them shell shock. From here, the next step is to continue your double story structure by laying in an element that guides your audience's mind out of shock into surreal connection, which is what the accidental shooting scene does by transitioning into a moment of collage. Here's how it works. As Jules panics about getting pulled over by the cops with blood everywhere, Vincent tries to reassure him.
Just take it to a friendly place, that's all.
This is the Valley, Vincent. Marcellus ain't got no friendly places in the Valley.
Well, Jules, this ain't my fucking town, man.
Shit.
What are you doing?
I'm calling my partner in Toluca Lake.
Where's Toluca Lake?
Over the hill by Burbank Studios. If Jimmy's ass ain't home, I don't know what the fuck we're gonna do, because I ain't got no partners in 818. Jimmy, how you doing, man? It's Jules.
This scene is thick with the devices of collage. The characters have stopped arguing and gone back to repeating each other's words. Friendly place, friendly places, Toluca Lake, Toluca Lake. Jules brings unexpected parts of the world into juxtaposition through the phone call. He and Vincent make a new friend in Jimmy. So at the same time as the characters journey into a moment of surreal connection, the double story structures of the scene bring the audience on this journey too. And that's the 2-part blueprint for engaging your audience with surrealism. First, put in story beats where your characters argue, and punctuate those beats of disconnection with sharp shocks that make the audience feel fractured too. Second, bring your characters together in moments of surreal connection, and reinforce those moments of connection with the techniques of imaginative collage, so that your audience travels side by side with the characters into dream. And after you write one scene like this, do what the screenwriters for Pulp Fiction did and write more. Because when you leave behind the plot techniques the traditional Hollywood scripts use to keep the audience's attention taut, you need to continually recreate a sense of narrative urgency and dramatic stakes by refreshing the cognitive conflict between nihilism and surreal connection, again and again and again. If you want to write a script that generates the cognitive experience of surreal connection, Pulp Fiction is a great blueprint. Steal its collage plot, its odd couple characters, its constantly recycled dialogue, and its shock and dream scenes. And Pulp Fiction can also offer you a bigger 2-step blueprint for writing an indie script. Step 1, Look outside mainstream cinema to find an alternate cognitive effect, like the surreal experience of imaginative unity. Step 2, communicate that effect by sticking to the classic methods for introducing story world and character, and for reverse engineering plot and tone. Like a Royale with cheese, it's the classic old recipe on a road trip to somewhere new. If you want to get started on your own surreal script, here's a couple of exercises you can try. First, write a classic pulp fiction story, a western, or a romantic comedy, or any other cheap paperback genre you enjoy. Now, chop up the story and rearrange it into out-of-order chapters. Open with the scene 3/4 of the way in, and return back to that same scene at the end. Second, jot down the big story beats of one of your dreams. Now, write a scene where two characters journey through those story beats together, constantly recycling each other's dialogue as they go. In 1995, a futuristic-looking children's movie was released in theaters. It was titled simply Toy Story. Toy Story was the first feature film created by Pixar, but it wasn't Pixar's first product. That honor goes to a piece of technology named the Pixar Image Computer. The computer was the brainchild of Steve Jobs, who'd become a major investor in Pixar after he'd been let go by Apple in 1985. Jobs envisioned Pixar as the next Apple computers, with the twist that Pixar would focus even more than Apple on visual design. But over its first 2 years of operation, Pixar barely sold 100 computers, and as sales flatlined, the company spiraled towards bankruptcy, until at the last moment, Pixar was saved by a cash injection from Disney. So why did Disney invest in a computer company? Well, because as Pixar was trying to sell its computer, it made some demo films to show off the power of its technology. These short animated works caught the eye of Disney Animation, and Pixar found itself with the money to make a full feature film for wide release. There was just one problem. Disney hated the script that John Lasseter and the story team at Pixar had created, and they demanded a major rewrite. The writers at Pixar did what they were told, and the results were not good. The screen tests bombed, and Pixar was almost shut down again. But Steve Jobs dug back into his pockets to keep the lights on, and the Pixar team decided to reject Disney's notes and go back to making the film their own way. The result was the script for Toy Story. Disney's internal analysts predicted Toy Story would be at best a modest success, but Toy Story became a box office smash, grossing over $360 million and paving the way for Pixar to make more films its own way. Films like The Incredibles, Monsters, Inc., Finding Nemo, WALL-E, and Up, which have together grossed billions of dollars and earned 16 Academy Awards. What's the big lesson of this story? Well, Pixar was started by tech heads, and they built Toy Story like an engineer would. So they consciously adopted Aristotle's method of reverse engineering, and they used it rigorously. And this method of reverse engineering allowed the rookies at Pixar to tap into a huge audience that had been overlooked by Disney, the biggest animation studio in history. How did Disney overlook this huge audience? Well, like all studios, they had a blind spot that was a natural but unfortunate byproduct of their efforts to make movies on an industrial scale. To provide theaters with a constant stream of fresh movies and to take advantage of the most profitable windows in the calendar for releasing films, movie studios want to regularize the production of films as much as possible. And of all the challenges posed by this drive to regularize movie production, none is bigger than the challenge posed by that part of the assembly line known as the screenwriter. Screenwriters don't work like clockwork. Sometimes they get distracted or depressed or their imaginations run dry. And even at their best, their greatest epiphanies come unexpectedly and irregularly, 2 weeks after the critical fourth quarter stock report deadline has passed. So screenwriting adds a massive degree of uncertainty to Hollywood's supply chain, continually threatening the industry with financial disaster. And to keep the business going, the studios therefore have a huge incentive to make writing as mechanized and reliable as possible. Rather than encouraging writers to develop creative and innovative new stories, studios instead ask them to take the less risky approach of copying what has worked in the past, asking them to crank out the same basic story structures over and over again. Audiences, in turn, end up supporting these stories because there aren't other big-budget movies to see. So we get more and more of the same kind of Hollywood script until people think that script is the only kind of script. And this really is where we get the idea that there's a universal formula for making movies. It's not that there are eternal archetypes in the human mind. It's that formulaic stories are an easy way to keep the scripts flowing and the investors happy. But the success of Toy Story reveals that even within this industrial storytelling machine, there's still room to innovate. That's because movies aren't just made for supply lines and investors. They're also made for audiences. And if you can listen to your audience and give them a story that they want, you not only make your audience happy, you make all your investors happy too. So how do you pull off this feat of corporate innovation? You do what Pixar did and reverse engineer. You cast away the current Hollywood formulas for children's movies, and then you identify a specific cognitive effect that audiences crave, but that Hollywood has been neglecting. So what was the cognitive effect that Pixar's story engineers felt that Disney was neglecting? Let's find out by turning to the end of Toy Story's script and identifying as precisely as we can the psychological experience that it imparts. If you haven't watched Toy Story yet or read its script, now's the time to hit pause and go enjoy. Toy Story chronicles the adventures of a pull-string cowboy doll named Woody, who was once the favorite plaything of his owner, 6-year-old Andy, but who gets replaced by a newfangled Space Ranger toy named Buzz Lightyear. For most of the script, Woody tries to get rid of Buzz and reclaim his old place in Andy's affections, until at the end the two toys open their hearts to each other and become buddies, joining forces to escape the clutches of the toy-destroying neighbor Sid and make their way home. In the final beats of the script, after Buzz and Woody have finally made it back to safety, they sit together as Andy opens his Christmas presents. The first present is a Mrs. Potato Head, and the toys all cheer and congratulate Mr. Potato Head on his new life partner. It seems like a classic happy ending. Everybody comes together for a wedding. But the script doesn't end on this upbeat moment. Instead, there's one more present left for Andy to open.
Buzz Lightyear, you are not worried, are you?
Me? No. Are you?
Now, Buzz, what could Andy possibly get that is worse than you?
Oh, what is it? What is it? Wow, a puppy!
Even though Buzz and Woody do their best to laugh, this is not the ending they were hoping for. Because both of them have just been replaced in Andy's affections by a toy-chewing puppy. So having started with a classic comic bit about Mrs. Potato Head, the script's ending finishes with a pivot towards a classic tragic ending that returns the main characters, just like in The Godfather, to the dark place where they started. The script began with Woody being replaced by a new plaything, and the script now ends with both Woody and Buzz being replaced. But even though the script seems to end right where it began, one thing has changed since the start of the film. Buzz may have arrived exactly back where Woody was, but now there are two of them sitting in Andy's bedroom, grimacing and smiling weakly together. So Woody no longer needs to look alone into the tragic truth that time is passing, that Andy is growing up, that all toys will one day be pushed aside for adult things. Instead, Woody and Buzz can look into this tragic truth together. And so, rather than being marooned in a state of tragic isolation like Woody was at the start of the script, Woody and Buzz now discover the comfort of a special kind of sympathy. As we've explored in other lectures, many Hollywood movies encourage sympathy. But typically, that sympathy is felt by one person toward another. What's unusual about the end of Toy Story is that two characters feel sympathy for each other. Buzz feels sympathy for Woody, and Woody feels sympathy for Buzz. So instead of moving in one direction, the sympathy moves reciprocally between two characters. And making this circle of sympathy even bigger is the fact that we, the audience, join in. Because although we're not literally replaced by a puppy, We carry in our own hearts the same dark truth that Buzz and Woody discover at the end of Toy Story. Someday we'll be made expendable. Someday the world will move on without us and we will lose our home. Because after all, that's what it means to be a living thing. You're born, you grow, you flourish, and finally, when your time runs out, you die. At the time that Toy Story was produced, Disney's studio machine didn't believe there was a great deal of profit to be made from this honest exploration of earthly mortality. And in fact, Disney's big hit the year before had been The Lion King, which took completely the opposite approach to connecting with audiences. Instead of inviting us into a circle of death, The Lion King sang of the circle of life, encouraging a spiritual feeling of immortality. But Pixar realized that there had long been a tragic recognition of mortality in children's literature. Back at the dawn of storytelling, there had been fairy tales like Little Red Riding Hood, where a girl is eaten by a wolf. And back at the dawn of movie making, Disney itself had crafted fairy tales like Bambi, where the main character's young mother is suddenly killed in the final pages. Because children know about death. They see it and they want to talk about it. It's just adults who get awkward. We don't want to spoil childhood with dark things, so we bottle it up. But Toy Story shows that there can be enormous positive power in unbottling the dark truth of our mortality. Since death is the deepest truth of human life, it can be the one thing that connects us all. And so, although there may be nothing more frightening than confronting your own end alone, there can be no greater comfort than facing our shared mortality together. This awareness of our own fleeting lives is what creates the circle of sympathy that joins us to Buzz and to Woody at the end of Toy Story's script. This is what swells regular sympathy into big sympathy as we hold hands and share in the deep impermanence that makes us all one. So now, let's see how Pixar created a script that helped audiences to accept their mortality together, so that you can lead your audience into big sympathy yourself. Like Pixar's original screenwriters did, let's reverse engineer back from Toy Story's cognitive effect to its four main story components, starting with how the script establishes the story world in its opening beats. So here are those opening beats. So the very first thing the script shows us is a row of moving boxes, which immediately tells us that this is a story world of transitions and change. People move, literally and figuratively. They relocate from one neighborhood to another. They grow from children into adults. They're always leaving their past lives behind. The second thing the script shows us is that the world doesn't acknowledge these changes as upsetting. Instead, it does its best to pretend they're no big deal. That's why the moving boxes are decorated with crayon and incorporated into a game. And why the game is a goofy Western spoof where Mr. Potato Head terrorizes other toys for money, money, money. Why this repeated emphasis on money? Because money is the moment childhood ends. Children don't understand money. There's a reason it's called cold, hard cash. It's the opposite of innocence. A child would never give up anything important for money, but lots of adults do. Yet crucially, the story world of Toy Story's script doesn't acknowledge this dark side of money. It doesn't admit that our transition into adult materialism involves a tragic loss. Instead, through the buffoonery of Mr. Potato Head, it makes us laugh past it, just like it makes us gloss over the moving boxes, treating them not as an existential threat, but as part of a game. So to live in this story world is to be propelled through constant changes, and yet to be told that these changes are not dark or disturbing, or even really changes. They're the natural way of things, as inevitable as a baby growing up. You might recognize this story world as a version of our own modern world. Every day, our world becomes something new. It fills our lives with new technologies, new faces, new economic realities. Yet rather than acknowledging how strange and wrenching this can be, our world constantly reassures us that this is normal. It tells us not to fight the future. It urges us to smile and play along, suppressing the fears and the anxieties that we all feel inside. The bigger lesson here is that if you're writing a children's story, try creating a story world with a deep problem that it refuses to acknowledge. Because that's the world that children know. A world of dark conflicts and difficulties that adults keep hurrying them past, telling them not to look. Against its story world of smiling change, Toy Story juxtaposes two main characters, Woody and Buzz. As we'll see in a moment, Woody and Buzz are both reflections of a single deep conflict against the story world. But first, let's look at how Woody and Buzz are different. Woody sees the future coming and he does his best to stop it. Buzz doesn't see the future and he crashes on, unchanging. So each of these characters resists different aspects of the story world. Woody resists the world's insistence that change is normal. Where the world is blind and indifferent to the pain of transition, Woody is anxious and self-aware, admitting that change can be so hard and distressing that it can even feel like a kind of death. Buzz, meanwhile, resists the idea that change has to happen at all, clutching his cardboard packaging as though it'll last forever. But even though Woody and Buzz are different on the surface, they're really two sides of the same coin, because this is how all of us resist difficult changes in our lives. We simultaneously fret about the changes and deny that they're occurring. When we get our first gray hair, we pause and worry. And then we pluck it out and go on like it never happened. Worry and denial. Worry and denial. These are two twinned expressions of the same deeper emotional conflict. Another way of saying this is that Woody and Buzz together make up a soliloquy. And in particular, they combine to give a very famous kind of soliloquy, the kind of soliloquy given by Shakespeare's Hamlet. Hamlet might seem an odd script to compare with Toy Story, but a year before Toy Story, Disney had consciously created a more spiritually sanguine version of Hamlet's plot in The Lion King. And in Toy Story, Pixar restored Hamlet's tragic uncertainty about the life hereafter by preserving the Danish prince's deep inner conflict about death. When Hamlet asks himself to be or not to be, he's torn between fighting the realities of his world and ignoring them, between taking arms against his troubles or retreating into the private peace of his mind. He's torn, in other words, between anxious resistance and oblivious denial, between being Woody and being Buzz. And like Woody and Buzz, the thing that Hamlet is anxiously resisting and obliviously denying is his mortality. There's a reason that Hamlet is still in school in his 30s. He's not ready to grow up and leave the wonders of childhood behind. But when Hamlet's father is killed, Hamlet is forced to confront the more adult side of life. That's what happens when your parents die. Suddenly, there's no one left standing between you and the final curtain. As we saw back in our introductory lectures, Hamlet's conflicted to be or not to be soliloquy is a powerful source of sympathy. And so when Toy Story splits this soliloquy between Woody and Buzz, it generates the same sympathy, only now split between two characters instead of just one. Toy Story's script introduces the first half of Hamlet's soliloquy by establishing Woody's anxious resistance. The instant that Andy leaves the room, the script tells us, Woody's eyes come to life. The cowboy doll sits up, his expression changing from a smile to worry. Then, to establish that Woody's precise worry is a concern about the future, the script has Woody summon all the other toys to a staff meeting where he demands to know if everyone has picked a moving buddy, then scolds the other toys for acting like the relocation is a big joke, and finally reassures them that he's got a plan to handle Andy's new toy. So Woody is a thinker, a worrier, a planner. While the rest of the world crashes on ahead, he can see down the road. And the more he sees, the more he wants to stop what's coming. Having established Woody's self-conscious resistance to the passing of time, the script then introduces Buzz's oblivious denial as a counterpoint. Buzz is so deeply oblivious to the world that he doesn't even realize it exists. Caught up in his own imaginary reality, he thinks that Andy's bedroom is an alien planet light years away from Earth. Once Buzz is introduced, the script now has both halves of Hamlet's soliloquy. and it then proceeds to put them into conflict, making Buzz and Woody argue and fight and plot each other's overthrow. This can seem like a conflict between a hero and an antagonist, but in reality, it's the conflict between the two faces of the same tragic hero. Because although Buzz and Woody have different bodies, they share a single experience. They're both toys in a world where childhood ends. And just as we all go back and forth on how to handle our mortality, sometimes doing our best to outthink it, sometimes denying that we're really getting old, so too are Buzz and Woody literally of two minds about how to cope. The more general trick you can pick up from Woody and Buzz is a technique for creating multiple heroes. Give them the same root conflict and fear, but have them battle their fear in different and even conflicting ways, so they seem rivals on the surface, but eventually reveal themselves to be brothers in the fight. Now, let's see how Toy Story reverse engineered its plot. As we discussed in our earlier lectures, reverse engineering involves adapting a pre-existing story structure that generates the rough cognitive effect that you want. And that's exactly what Toy Story does with Hamlet. Shakespeare's play has a 5-act structure, and Hamlet himself goes on a 5-part journey. First, Hamlet is bereaved. He suffers through the death of his father, making him feel his own mortality. Second, Hamlet's loss puts him in conflict with the world. He berates his mother, kills Polonius, feuds with Laertes, and so on. Third, Hamlet's external conflict with the world triggers an inner conflict that manifests itself in his third act to be or not to be soliloquy. This inner conflict isolates Hamlet and makes him feel more and more alone. Fourth, Hamlet suddenly realizes that he's not alone. He sees the mirror of his own situation in Laertes and comes to accept what his mother told him back in the first act, that all of us lose people that we care about because life necessarily involves death. With this, Hamlet stops feeling sorry for himself and experiences sympathy for someone else. And then fifth, just after Hamlet feels this broader sympathetic connection with others, he dies. The plot, in other words, kills off its main character. This is the critical final step to creating big sympathy because when the main character dies, the audience loses someone they've come to care about, and so it triggers a feeling of bereavement in them. Just as Hamlet lost his father, now the audience has lost Hamlet, incorporating the audience into the circle of loss. So to sum it up, the 5-part structure is bereaving the character, external conflict, inner resolution, bereaving the audience. The script of Toy Story follows the same 5-part structure. Here's how it works. In Toy Story, the first part is when Woody is confronted by the arrival of Buzz. This displaces Woody, just like Hamlet is displaced by Claudius, and forces Woody to confront his own mortality. The second part occurs when Woody throws a temper tantrum that ends with Buzz being knocked out the window, just like Hamlet throws a temper tantrum that ends with Polonius being stabbed. The third part is when Buzz and Woody fight, and as they fight, they drag themselves into deeper and deeper problems. Just like Hamlet's attack on Polonius gets him expelled from court, so do Buzz and Woody find themselves cast out of their home. The fourth part is when Buzz and Woody stop fighting and recognize their shared mortality, just like Hamlet sees his shared situation in Laertes. Buzz finally realizes that he's just a toy, and although this is a brutally disillusioning moment, it enables him and Woody to reconcile. The tragic sense of mortality that's too much for Woody to handle alone becomes something he can handle with Buzz, and they work together to get back home. And the fifth part is when Woody and Buzz are replaced by the puppy. So they don't literally die like Hamlet does, but we see they're about to get chewed. If you want to create big sympathy in audiences, you won't find a more time-tested model than Hamlet and Toy Story's 5-part plot. So write a plot about someone who suffers a loss, driving them to rage against the world and themselves, before they see that others have suffered the same loss, until in the very last moment, they're lost themselves. To reverse engineer a tone that creates big sympathy, Toy Story's script alternates between a sentimental and a comic narrator, back and forth continuously. This has the effect of turning the entire script into a soliloquy between the perspectives of Woody and Buzz. When the narrator is sentimental, the tone is anxious, worried, dark, like Woody. When the narrator is comic, it's playful, carefree, joyfully oblivious, like Buzz. One of the dark Woody moments occurs when Sid blows up the toy's friend, Combat Carl, with a firecracker, prompting the script to bleakly intone, "A large, black scorch mark is all that remains where Combat Carl once stood." This terrifyingly solemn moment literalizes the ultimate horror that Woody worries about. Childhood will end, and the toys will be destroyed. At the opposite end of the spectrum are the comic moments of narration where the script breathes with Buzz's oblivious sense of joy. Here's how the script reads when Buzz and Woody are about to be blown up like Combat Carl, until Buzz activates his toy wings, and they escape.
Hey, Buzz! You're flying!
This isn't flying, this is falling with style.
Ha-ha! To infinity and beyond!
So joyful is the moment that even Woody forgets to worry. For an instant, he's lost in play again. By switching between sounding like Woody and sounding like Buzz, the tone of the script recreates the soliloquy in us, so that we don't just feel for Woody and Buzz's conflict, we feel with it. And because this back and forth of tone permeates the whole script, it does what the plot does and makes the feeling of sympathy everywhere. It's not restricted to a single character. It lives in every story beat. So if you want to create big sympathy, try this technique of alternating between a comic and a sentimental narrator, moving your audience's mind through a big script-length soliloquy. Now that we've reverse engineered the nuts and bolts of Toy Story's story world, character, plot, and tone, let's flesh out our blueprint by tackling the most challenging kind of scene to write in a script that generates big sympathy. That scene is the one where sympathy is generated between two previously opposed characters. This is the crucial moment where regular old sympathy becomes a circle of reciprocal sympathy that draws the audience in. And the great challenge of writing this scene, of course, is that two characters who are feuding rivals suddenly have to develop a deep appreciation for each other's point of view. So how do you accomplish this marvelous transformation of feuding hate into mutual love? The most straightforward way is through an old script writing trick we learned back in our introductory lectures, the trick of the mirror scene. Shakespeare uses a mirror scene to make Hamlet sympathetic for Laertes, and Toy Story does the very same thing to make Buzz and Woody sympathetic for each other. In Toy Story, the mirror scene begins with Woody trapped in a milk crate, asking Buzz for help. But Buzz is too dejected to do anything.
No, Woody. For the first time, I am thinking clearly. You were right all along. I'm not a space ranger. I'm just a toy. A stupid little insignificant toy.
In this moment, Buzz suddenly grows up. He becomes aware of a world beyond him, and this awareness is a dark and tragic one. Woody tries to talk Buzz out of his funk, telling him how great and important it is to be a toy, but Buzz can't go back to being a child. He finally sees what Woody sees. He's grasped his own mortality. This seems to be the end of the line for Buzz and Woody. They finally agree. But unfortunately, what they agree is that being a toy is hopeless. And then suddenly, Buzz leaps into action. He hoists the milk crate off Woody, and the two of them join forces to get back to Andy. And what causes Buzz to shake off his despair is this moment of mirroring.
All I can do is, there's a snake in my boots. Why would Andy ever want to play with me when he's got you? I'm the one that should be strapped to that rocket.
This is the mirror moment that launches Buzz into action. Because when Buzz glimpses his own feelings of insignificance in Woody, he loses his sense of tragic isolation. He realizes that someone else feels exactly like him. and so he experiences a deep sense of sympathy that bonds him and Woody together. So if you want to create big sympathy in your next script, write a mirror scene like this. Have your main character see the reflection of his own condition in his great rival, finding a moment of sympathy, before he and his rival are snatched away to a fate that mirrors back the audience's own future doom. So that's how Pixar reverse engineered a script that creates big sympathy. Sympathy not with one person or two people or five, but sympathy with the entire human condition. If you want to do the same, copy Toy Story's blueprint. Create a story world with a deep human problem it refuses to acknowledge. Create two main characters who oppose that problem, one by denying it, the other by worrying about it too much. Create a comic, sentimental narrator who soliloquizes between joy and fear. And create a 5-part plot that carries the two main characters into conflict, then into a mirror reconciliation, and finally into a tragic shared destruction that the audience recognizes as their own. And Toy Story can offer you something even bigger than this blueprint for big sympathy. It can open your eyes to the vast storytelling possibilities that lie beyond the blind spots in the Hollywood widget machine. Toy Story reveals that you can leave behind the old formula of a 3-act structure to base your plot on a 5-act play. It reveals that you can leave behind the old formula of a hero's journey to tell a soliloquy story about two heroes. And it reveals that you can leave behind all the old formulas through a simple 3-step process. Step 1, listen to your audience, identifying their deepest fears. Step 2, identify a cognitive effect that helps the audience face those fears. Step 3, reverse engineer a script to create that cognitive effect. To help you reverse engineer, go ahead and look for inspiration in the huge library of storytelling blueprints that exists beyond Hollywood, like Pixar did with Hamlet. But don't hesitate to do what Toy Story did when it split up Hamlet's soliloquies between a pull-string cowboy and a plastic astronaut. Don't hesitate, that is, to innovate. If you'd like to write a script that creates big sympathy, here are a couple exercises you can try. First, make a list of difficult changes that people go through. Maybe some of them are changes you've been through yourself. Then, sketch a story where a character experiences this change, wrestling against it internally and externally, before at last finding a bigger community of individuals who've been forced through the change too. And then end your story by making the audience feel that the change is coming for them. Second, write a mirror scene where a character with a problem realizes that their biggest rival is facing the same problem, shifting them from opposed antagonism into mutual sympathy. What do wood chippers, mallard ducks, and uncircumcised assassins all have in common? Nothing. They have nothing in common at all. Unless you've happened to see Fargo. Like Toy Story, Fargo was a surprise hit. It was the Coen brothers' 6th film, and while some of their earlier films had developed cult followings, their most recent effort, The Hudsucker Proxy, had been a studio bomb, costing the studio roughly $40 million to produce and earning back less than $3 million domestic. So Fargo was shot modestly on an indie budget, and expectations were low. But it became an international hit, grossing over $60 million worldwide and earning an Oscar for Best Original Screenplay. And like the Coen brothers' other films, it's only grown more popular with time. In fact, it's proved so popular that it's inspired its own television show, which has itself gone on to win multiple Emmys. Yet, despite all that, the success of Fargo continues to remain something of a mystery. Its plot is eccentric. Its main character is a pregnant cop with a non-standard accent. Its story world is set in North Dakota. And as for its tone, well, it's hard to say whether it's funny or deeply disturbing. Everything about the script, in short, is a little odd, which raises the question, how does something so peculiar become so popular? After all, a place like Fargo, North Dakota has its special charms, but most of us don't live there. In this lecture, we'll explore how Fargo negotiates this paradox so you can too, both in your screenwriting and in your life beyond. Because this paradox is much, much bigger than the movies. In fact, it's the basic condition of our modernity. As the old traditions that used to bind societies together have increasingly fallen away, we've gained more freedom to choose what we want to be. And the more freedom we've gained, the more we've indulged in our own little idiosyncrasies, slowly becoming traditions unto ourselves. And yet even as we've all gotten stranger and stranger, we don't want to be strangers. We want to be different, but we still want to be part of something bigger. And Fargo shows us how. Even though Fargo is a little different, we'll use our same tried and true method of reverse engineering to unlock its special secrets and innovations. And so we'll start as always with the ending, doing our best to isolate its particular cognitive effect as precisely as we can. So if you haven't seen Fargo or read its script, now's the time to hit pause so you can. After the failed arch-villain Jerry is dragged away weeping in his underwear, Fargo's script closes with an intimate domestic scene of Brainerd, Minnesota Police Chief Marge Gunderson and her husband Norm in bed together.
So?
3-cent stamp.
Your mallard.
Yeah.
Norm, that's terrific.
It's just 3 cents.
It's terrific.
Hartman's Blue Wing Teal got the 29-cent. People don't much use the 3-cent.
Oh, for Pete's, of course they do. Every time they raise the darn postage, people need little stamps.
This scene is filled with meaning, but it's not the kind of meaning that we usually mean by meaning. After all, in the grand scheme of things, 3-cent stamps really aren't very important. North Dakota would survive without them. The particular 3-cent stamp, however, happens to be incredibly important to Norm. Or rather, the mallard on the stamp happens to be incredibly important to Norm, because it's an image that Norm painted himself. It's his own work of art. In fact, the mallard is so important to Norm that he'd hoped that it was destined for bigger things. The 29-cent stamp, perhaps. So although the mallard has no transcendental meaning, it has a deeply personal meaning. And that's not the only intensely personal meaning expressed in this scene. In Marge's response to Norm, we see that he holds a deeply personal meaning to her. Like the mallard, Norm is an odd duck. His name is a cosmic joke. But Marge is devoted to Norm. She sees something special in his eccentric ways. So she makes the effort to say something generous, to make Norm feel good about his tiny victory. And in this moment, we feel the same sense of personal meaning. Not just about Norm, but about Marge and North Dakota and the very strange movie we've just seen. Because it means something special to us. Maybe that special feeling isn't universal. After all, the movie did only earn $60 million worldwide. Star Wars earned over $700 million. But in the same way that Norm cherishes his duck and Marge cherishes Norm, we cherish Fargo, loving it for its eccentricities. The broader philosophical term for this feeling of personal meaning is existentialism. Like surrealism, which we discussed in our lecture on Pulp Fiction, existentialism emerged in the 20th century as an effort to counteract the nihilism that had followed in the wake of the era's growing skepticism about the possibility of universal reason. But unlike the surrealists, who tried to connect us through what they saw as the common unconscious of our imagination, the existentialists decided that meaning wasn't shared. In fact, they decided that what made meaning special was that it was individual to each of us. Each of us had the capacity to make our own particular meaning out of the debris of life. Each of us could create something that had never existed and never would again. Each of us could be an original. This feeling of existential meaning is the cognitive effect that the ending of Fargo guides us into. It provides an answer to the bleak meaninglessness of modern life by revealing that the answer is you. You can make it mean, and the fact that other people don't understand is exactly what makes it special. So now, let's reverse engineer how Fargo conveys this special experience of existential meaning. The script starts by establishing the world as it exists without existentialism, which is to say, the opening beat of the script establishes a story world devoid of meaning. Here, the world is presented as a nothing of white on white, void of lines or color, an empty canvas. For the existentialist, this empty canvas is an opportunity to make our own meaning. Like Norm when he sits down with his paints, we can create anything we like. But as the script goes on to make clear in its next few beats, this liberating sense of possibility doesn't exist within the normal day-to-day of Fargo's story world. Because most of the people in this story world don't see its blank nothingness as a source of freedom. Instead, like a man caught in a snowdrift, they feel trapped and oppressed by the infinite white, cycling back and forth between horror at their own insignificance and anger at the things that make them feel this way. We meet one of these trembling, rageful people in the script's next few scenes. He's Jerry Lundegaard, the driver of the car. And as one of the film's antagonists, he puts a human face on the core rule of the story world. He's a paradigmatic instance of what it's like to be buried in the snow. In the film's opening scene, Jerry arrives in a dive bar with a plan to take control of his life. He's going to hire a couple of men to kidnap his wife and extort a hefty ransom from his bullying father-in-law. But no sooner has Jerry met the prospective kidnappers than he promptly finds himself out of his depth. First, he's late. Or maybe he's not. It's hard to say. There are different opinions on the matter. Then, Jerry hands over the keys to a car. Except, that's not what was agreed. Or maybe it was. That's hard to say too. It's possible there was a misunderstanding. Or that something was left unsaid. At this point, one of the men snaps at Jerry, "I'm not going to sit here and debate. I will say this though, what Shep told us didn't make a lot of sense." Jerry dissents, but the man repeats, "Makes no sense." And then as Jerry tries to explain, he gets entangled in awkward, embarrassing details that expose his own impotence, until finally the men cut him off and take the keys to the car. So here, elegantly laid out, is the core law of the world. It's a world of conflicting perspectives. Everyone has their own point of view of things. And as a result, nothing adds up. It doesn't make sense. There's no meaning in it. As one of those conflicting perspectives, Jerry is deeply frustrated because, like all of the conflicting perspectives, Jerry is sure he is right. Not just right in the sense of being right for him, but right in the more global sense that he believes that his way is the correct way for the whole world to be. So when the world doesn't turn out like Jerry wants, he becomes exasperated and panicked and angry. He attacks his own car with an ice scraper. He tries to get the money he thinks is his due by lying to his father-in-law and double-crossing the kidnappers. Jerry, in other words, tries to impose his will on the world. He tries to install his own universal order. But it backfires utterly on him. Instead, he only adds to the chaos and the conflict. Another way of saying this is that the world of Fargo is a world of blind Darwinian struggle. Every animal thinks it's superior. Every animal thinks it's right. But by trying to dominate the other animals around them, they just perpetuate the endless nightmare of the fight. So that's the core law of Fargo's story world. Everyone is gripped by a rage for individual order that ends up creating nothing but strife. The alternative to this story world, as we saw at the film's conclusion, is an existential stance. To be an existentialist is to step back from the fight. It's to give up the rage to control and instead allow others to follow their own nature. It's to acknowledge that life can mean different, even opposite things at once. And so it's to find meaning in one's own personal interpretation of the world, while permitting others to do the same. In Fargo, the character who most embodies this alternative to the story world is Marge. You'll notice that unlike all of our other discussions of movie characters, I didn't say that Marge is in conflict with the story world. Strictly speaking, from a story perspective, Marge is in conflict with the world of the script. All main characters are. But since the world of Fargo is itself conflict, and since Marge is the opposite of that, it's a bit misleading to refer to her conflict. So instead, we'll refer to her alternative to the story world. Marge is someone who accepts that what's right for her isn't right for everyone. She doesn't add to the blind Darwinian conflict. She gentles it. From a story perspective, this is a daring choice. If your main character actually decreases conflict, how does anything happen? Isn't the source of plot a conflict between character and story world? In a moment, we'll explore the ingenious way that the plot of Fargo makes its plot go. But for now, let's just see how the script establishes Marge and her alternative to the story world. The script introduces Marge by showing her as she's woken up in the middle of the night by a phone call. With this little story beat, the script crisply establishes what it's like to live in a world that you can't control. You want to sleep. The world wants you awake. It seems like a little thing, but it gets to the root of what makes us crazy about the world. It's always blindly interrupting our basic needs. And one of those most basic needs is sleep, which is why we're reduced to a state of nervous collapse if our sleep is constantly interrupted. Stalin's police used this simple tactic to break people in the gulags, and it's still used by newborns to break their parents today. So you might expect Marge to get upset when her sleep gets disrupted, or at least a little exasperated, but instead her response is, okay, there in a jiff. With this, the script establishes that Marge is the opposite of Jerry. She doesn't fight the world, she rolls with it. And a few minutes later, when Marge ends up in weather so cold that the other cops have just stayed indoors, she doesn't complain or order them to join her, she just gets on with it. And when Marge then doubles over, vomiting in the snow from morning sickness, her only remark is, well, that passed. So unlike Jerry, who thrashes like an insect in a spider's web, Marge never makes a bad situation worse. However aggravating things get, she just goes with it. So that's how Fargo establishes story world and its character alternative. And now, let's return to our nagging question about plot. Since Marge is a source not of conflict, but of peace, how do we have a plot? Here's how the script reverse engineers it. First, it waits a very long time to introduce Marge, so long that you'd be forgiven for thinking that Jerry was the main character. It's not until about 30 pages into a 100-page script that we meet Marge. Almost a third of the story has passed. And that's basically a record. Can you think of an earlier Hollywood film that waits that long to introduce its main character? But Fargo delays the entrance of Marge because it has to. Since Marge's function is to dampen conflict, the script has to build up as much conflict as it can before it introduces her. So it spends an unprecedented amount of time with Jerry, stoking up the world. It's a radically innovative technique, but it works. And here we can see the bigger value of not thinking about stories in terms of a fixed structure, but in terms of our chosen result. In the old archetypal way of understanding screenplays, the first act is 30 pages, which would mean that Marge's introduction would be the beginning of the second act, which is far too late to introduce the main character. On this older way of thinking, the script would be a failure and would need to be heavily rewritten, which is a very strange conclusion to come to about an Oscar-winning screenplay. And that's why it's not helpful to wed ourselves too tightly to standard notions of plot structure. They stop us from discovering other opportunities to move audiences. So Marge's delayed entrance is the first clever thing that Fargo's script does to make its existential story work. And then the script does a second clever thing. It makes Marge a detective. So rather than being the source of the conflict that moves the plot forward, Marge is a cop who tries to eliminate that conflict and restore the peace. This gives Marge a strong reason, internal to the story, for acting as a plot killer. And it's why the heroes of so many existential stories tend to be some kind of investigator. They're not in the script to drive the action. They're in the script to interpret the action. Because after all, that's what it means in the real world to be an existentialist. Life moves beyond the power of any individual to control it. So to become the hero of our own story is simply to interpret life, saying, this is what it means to me. And there you have the script's clever two-part recipe for establishing an existentialist plot. First, delay Marge's entrance. Second, make her a detective. Having put these two plot elements in motion, the script then builds them out into a simple two-part story structure. First, the script ramps up the nihilist conflict. So Jerry and his various confederates all hatch schemes to bend the world to their will, only to see these schemes backfire one by one. Jerry tries to double-cross the kidnappers by secretly asking his father-in-law for a much bigger ransom. But then his father-in-law refuses to give the money to Jerry and instead insists on making the drop himself. And then Carl discovers the extra windfall in the briefcase and tries to double-cross his partner, only to end up hacked to death with an axe over a pointless argument over the dealership car. So everybody tries to have things their way, and in the end, all their plots unravel. Everyone ends up dead or captured, and the universe rolls on, absent of any greater purpose. So that's the first big action of the plot, the dramatizing of the world's Darwinian struggle. The second big action is Marge's discovery of her own personal meaning, which she does not by trying to bend the world into alignment with her own will, but by interpreting what it means to her. The script accomplishes most of this work by introducing Mike Yanagita, an old friend of Marge's who has no necessary relationship to the rest of the plot. This is another daring move by the script, but like the script's other bold choices, it's a logical consequence of its existential aims. The purpose of existentialism is to derive our own personal meaning from things that seem chaotically random. And so by introducing a random individual into the story, the script gives Marge a dramatic opportunity to take her own meaning from the chaos of the world. And Marge does this initially by rebuffing Yanagita's attempts to seduce her. She's made her personal choice, and that's norm. And then Marge takes her existentialism a step further. When she learns that Yanagita was lying about his wife, she revisits Jerry, thinking that perhaps he was lying about his wife too. There's no strict reason that the two men's behavior should be connected, but Marge follows her hunch, and it pays off for her. When hunches like this work out, most of us tend to believe that we're onto something genuinely bigger that reflects the deep logic of the way the world really is. That is, we leave existentialism for a sense of universal meaning. But the script is careful to show that Marge doesn't walk down this road. She doesn't confuse her own personal sense of meaning with the greater way of things. As she says to the last remaining kidnapper when she apprehends him, "And here you are, and it's a beautiful day. Well, I just don't understand it." That's existentialism, to find your own way in a world that you never piece together. Like the plot, the tone of Fargo's script is reverse engineered to generate an experience of existential meaning. And it cleverly does this by merging two of the classic narrators we discussed in our introductory lecture on tone, the God's Eye and the ironic. This combination of the ironic and the God's Eye is established in the script's opening title card, which reads, "This is a true story. The events depicted in this film took place in Minnesota in 1987. At the request of the survivors, the names have been changed. Out of respect for the dead, the rest has been told exactly as it occurred." So, like a God's Eye, this narrator declares that it sees the absolute truth, glimpsing what even the dead want, balancing the needs of the now and the ever after on perfect scales of justice. But like an ironic narrator, this narrator also juxtaposes the cosmic with the trivial, putting the mountain of absolute truth next to the pebble of Minnesota, 1987. This combination of the ironic and the God's Eye has the immediately noticeable effect of making everything in the script feel at once absolutely serious and ironically absurd, handing the audience the existential power to choose which way to see things. Is it ironically funny or deeply disturbing that Jerry's bullying father-in-law gets shot in the stomach by an even bigger bully? Is it ironically funny or deeply disturbing that Carl dies haggling over Cutlass Sierra when he's already ahead by almost $1 million? Is it ironically funny or deeply disturbing that a murderer tries to cover his tracks by using an epically loud wood chipper that sprays blood across the clean white snow? You decide. The narrator of Fargo leaves the interpretation up to you. Now that we've reverse engineered the nuts and bolts of Fargo's story world, character, plot, and tone, let's flesh out the script's blueprint for existentialism by looking at two of its key scenes in more granular detail. We've already seen that the big secret to Fargo is to begin by introducing a Darwinian struggle in the form of a botched crime spree, and then to wait for a third of the script to introduce its main character, the existential detective. But this big plot structure doesn't fix the smaller, ongoing plot challenge of gaining and maintaining the audience's interest. Because just like we saw with Pulp Fiction, Fargo's innovative cognitive goal distances it from the usual Hollywood hooks of empathy and suspense. In an existential world, there can be no real empathy because we can never know other people. And there also can't be real suspense because meaning exists in the here and now, independent of the future. So taking a page from Pulp Fiction, the script for Fargo solves this storytelling challenge by continually refreshing its own indie cognitive effect, which it does by cycling continually between scenes of intense nihilism and scenes of existential discovery. This cycling keeps the audience's brains constantly engaged in a process of personal meaning making. So even though there's not much suspense or empathy, the audience's brains never get bored because they always feel like they're doing something crucial and life-affirming. To see how this process works, let's reverse engineer blueprints for the two kinds of scenes that Fargo needs to maintain its cycle between nihilism and existentialism. Beginning with the first kind of scene, a scene that destroys meaning. If you wanted to create the cognitive effect of meaning destroyed, what would you do? Well, you'd craft a scene that seems like it should be full of meaning, but isn't, so that you make your audience expect an epiphany that never arrives, making them consciously feel its absence. So for example, you'd craft a mirror scene where the character didn't recognize himself in the mirror. Or you'd craft a scene about a botched crime that doesn't create any clues, becoming a non-event for both the crooks and the cops. Or maybe you combine both of these scenes into one, like Fargo does when Carl argues with the parking attendant. Prior to this scene, Carl has driven the Cutlass Sierra all over the place, leaving an easy trail for the cops to follow, until he finally makes a half-hearted attempt to cover his tracks by driving to the Minneapolis International Airport and stealing license plates from a car in long-term parking. Then, as Carl tries to leave the parking garage, he has this exchange with the attendant.
Hi, how you doing? Yeah, I decided not to park here. Oh, what do you mean you decided not to park here? Yeah, I just came in, I decided not to park here. But, well, I'm sorry, sir, but... Yeah, I decided not to, I'm not taking the trip, as it turns out. Well, I'm sorry, sir, but, well, we've still got to charge you the $4. I just pulled in here. I just fucking pulled in here! Well, but, see, there's a minimum charge of $4. Long-term parking charges by the day. I guess you think you're like an authority figure with that stupid fucking uniform, huh, buddy? King clip-on tie there? Big fucking man, huh? These are the limits of your life. Rule over your little fucking gate here. Here, there's your $4, you pathetic piece of shit.
In The Attendant, Carl is presented with the mirror of his own condition, a minor enforcer of someone else's grand money scheme. But Carl has no epiphany. Instead, he howls in fury at his reflection, cluelessly getting into a public spat over $4 when he's trying to lay low in order to earn 40 grand. Now, in another kind of script, this would be the mistake that undoes Carl, but not in Fargo. This episode is a non-event. It doesn't lead the cops to Carl or cause any plot developments to occur. It seems significant, but turns out to be meaningless. So at the same time as Carl is failing to achieve any insight on his own being, this scene also fails to add any greater meaning to the story. It cons us into thinking that it matters, and then goes nowhere, leading us into nihilism. So that's how you write the first kind of scene, making your audience feel a vacuum of meaning. Now, how do you reverse engineer the other kind of scene, where you replace this vacuum with an experience of existential discovery? Well, instead of creating a mirror scene that fails, you'd want to do the opposite and create a non-mirror scene that succeeds. You'd want to put two people together who have nothing in common and have one of them gain an existential insight, which is exactly what the script does when Marge visits the strip club. Here's how that scene goes.
So where are you girls from?
Chaska.
Sure, but I went to high school in Wet Bear Lake. Go Bears.
Okay. I want you to tell me what these fellows looked like.
Well, the little guy, he was kind of funny looking.
In what way?
I don't know, just funny looking.
Can you be any more specific?
I couldn't really say. He wasn't circumcised.
Was he funny looking aside from that?
Yeah.
So you were having sex with the little fellow then?
Uh-huh.
Anything else you can tell me about him?
No, like I say, he was funny looking. More than most people even.
The women of the strip club are about as opposite from Marge as you can get. They have casual sex with men they can't remember. She's in a committed relationship with the man she never forgets. So the audience's expectation in this scene is that there will be a clash of personalities. And the script does everything to feed this expectation by making the women of the strip club as grating as the parking attendant. Like the attendant, the women are absurdly caught up in their own little worlds, frustrating Marge's hunt for clues by relating all sorts of details that matter to them but have no bearing on anything else. They went to high school in White Bear Lake. They noticed that one of the kidnappers was not circumcised. They find most people to be funny looking. But unlike Carl, Marge isn't filled with violent frustration and despair by this situation. Instead, she patiently accepts it as the way of the world. So rather than mocking the women or giving up in exasperation, Marge keeps plugging on until finally the scene ends with this exchange.
Hey, they were going to the Twin Cities.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah. Is that useful to you?
Oh, you betcha.
By patiently letting the universe unfold and not struggling to bend it to her will, Marge has caught a glimpse of something that matters to her investigation. In the chaos, she finds a hint of personal meaning, to which one of the women can only ask, "Is that useful to you?" Because she still doesn't understand. And so there you see how to write the second kind of scene. Have your existential detective meet her polar opposite and discover her own private meaning mirrored back. And when you put these two scenes together, you have the blueprint for writing your own Fargo and carrying your audience into existentialism. First, start with a man with a pointless plan and have him immediately encounter another man with a different pointless plan, sparking a Darwinian battle of wills that spirals into chaos, involving more characters with more pointless plans, ratcheting up the conflict and the violence and the absurdity, and making your audience feel the death of meaning. Second, add in your existentialist detective. Have her patiently endure the frustration and stupidity and randomness of the blind Darwinian conflict until finally she discovers her own special meaning that doesn't make sense to anyone else, showing your audience the way to existentialism. So that's how Fargo works, and it brings an end to our 12 lectures on film scripts. Over these lectures, we've covered 12 very different things that film scripts can do. We've seen them encourage sentiment and the sublime, relief and longing, spiritual wonder and critical thought, redemption and romantic satisfaction, light charm and big sympathy, surreal connection and existential meaning. So which of these 12 cognitive effects is best? Which is the one the world needs now? Which is the one that matters most? Well, we've ended this part of the course with existentialism because our reverse engineering method is, in its own way, existentialist. Over our 12 lectures on film, we focused on what's special or different about the worlds and the characters and the plots and the tones of individual scripts. We've focused, in short, on how scripts do their own special thing, so you can recreate that special thing yourself. And since the goal of every script is to be special, the decision of what to write is entirely yours. Which audiences do you want to reach? How do you want to move them? The only correct answer is the one that's correct for you. So go out there and write your own mallard duck. Oh yeah? If you'd like to try your own hand at writing a little existentialism, here's 2 exercises you can try. First, imagine a world in chaos. Now imagine someone in that world who doesn't judge the things around her, but simply accepts and chronicles them. Maybe she's a marriage counselor, or a reporter dropped into a combat zone. Plot a little story in which your character gets drawn deeper and deeper into the pointless mayhem. Then imagine one way that she finds her own meaning in it. Second, write a scene using an ironic God's eye narrator who lets your audience decide whether the tone is serious or absurd. You can describe a murder, or a wedding, or anything else. The choice is up to you. TV is the future, because as high-quality film productions become more cost-effective, and as new distribution channels have opened up a huge range of markets hungry for content, TV has combined the best of film with the best of serial narrative, ushering us into an age of gorgeously visual, long-form storytelling. So over the next 5 lectures, we'll take everything we've learned about film scripts and we'll apply it to TV. For a long time, TV was dismissed as a cheap knockoff of film, but over the past decade its reputation has caught up, and we're now living in what's often called the golden age of television. In the United States alone, there are over 400 scripted series on the air, many of them so prestigious and popular that they've lured major movie stars to the second screen. The Sopranos is usually credited with kicking off this new era in 1999, and since then, TV has given us The Wire, and Mad Men, and 30 Rock, and Friday Night Lights, and Lost, and dozens of other series listed by the Writers Guild of America as the best of all time. Now, this new respect for TV is marvelous, but the 50 preceding years were hardly the dark ages. There have always been good shows on TV, innovative shows, powerful shows. I Love Lucy, The Twilight Zone, The Mary Tyler Moore Show, All in the Family. The list goes on. So why was TV looked down on for so long, and why is it so celebrated now? The answer is that TV differs from film in a few key ways that can be seen either as flaws or virtues, depending on your point of view. So in this lecture, we'll explain the reasons for these differences between film and TV by tracing them back to a single innovation in the way that TV handles conflict. Then we'll explore what this innovation means from a writer's perspective, preparing us for the next 4 lectures where we'll learn to write for TV ourselves. So let's start with the most obvious difference between film and TV, and that's the vast difference in quantity. An average movie is 2 hours. An average TV series is designed to run for 100 hours or more. If you like imaginative storytelling, that additional quality is a boon. But from a writer's perspective, it poses a huge challenge. How on earth do you generate all those hours of material? Well, you do it by building what screenwriters call an engine. This engine keeps powering the story forward, episode after episode, season after season. There are different ways to build a TV engine, but the most straightforward is by establishing a deep conflict in the story world. Conflict, as we've seen in previous lectures, is the driver of action. It's what pushes the plot. So the deeper and more substantial the conflict, the more story you can get out of it. As a result, TV shows are typically anchored in a conflict within the story world, rather than a conflict between the story world and character. The world is much bigger than a character, so if there's a conflict in the world, it can go on indefinitely. This repeated conflict also achieves another necessary goal of TV writing, which is consistency. Writing for TV is like working in a famous restaurant. Audiences don't just want to know that they'll be served a regular meal, they want that meal to taste the same every time. If they want variety, they'll go to a different restaurant or they'll turn the channel. So if they come back to you a second time, and then a third and a fourth time, and so on, they'll want to repeat the same positive experience they had before. And to provide a consistently positive TV experience, you have to make sure that every episode of your series generates the same cognitive effect. That's why it helps for TV shows to anchor conflict in the story world. When scripts instead anchor conflict between story world and character, as they typically do in film, the result is a journey over which either the story world or the character is transformed. In TV, we don't want that transformation. We want audiences to experience the same thing again and again. And that's what happens when a script establishes an ongoing conflict within the story world. That conflict is bigger than any individual, so no matter what happens with the characters, whether they triumph or change or even die, the story world rolls on, cranking out the same kinds of storylines with the same cognitive effects. So by rooting conflict in the story world, TV writers allow for two key things needed to please audiences for hundreds of hours. First, they keep the plot going. And second, they keep the viewing experience constant. This emphasis on generating a large body of consistent material has often led TV writing to be stigmatized as formulaic, the artistic equivalent of an industrial assembly line. But the more you learn about TV engines, the more you'll see that it's not helpful to think of TV scripts in terms of formulaic plots. To start with, the degree to which TV plots are formulaic is dramatically overstated. It's true that certain kinds of genres seem more patterned than others. Network sitcoms have certain consistent rhythms, often tied to the need to hit regular commercial breaks. Police procedurals typically begin with a crime and end with a solution. And it's also true that individual shows can quickly settle into their own structural grooves. Maybe they start each episode with a witty teaser or a dilemma. Maybe they close each episode with a heartfelt epiphany or cliffhanger. But even the most regularly plotted shows deviate constantly from past precedent. Some sitcom episodes have A and B plots, but others have A and B and C and D plots, and others just have A plots. Or take, for example, Law and Order, which is often held up as a model of formulaic plotting. The formula seems to be right there in the title. In the first half of every episode, the cops investigate a crime. That's the law. In the second half of every episode, the DAs prosecute the criminal. That's the order. But in fact, individual episodes of Law & Order depart wildly from this format. Sometimes the arrest is made quickly, and the prosecution takes up most of the show. Sometimes the investigation drags on, and the trial is a quick formality. Sometimes the cops catch the wrong guy and have to repeat their investigation. Sometimes the lawyers bungle their case. Sometimes the jury convicts someone who seems innocent. Sometimes the guilty go free. So there is no consistent plot formula to Law & Order. But there is one thing that remains absolutely consistent throughout every beat of every episode, and that's the engine, the core conflict in the story world. In Law & Order, this conflict is the ongoing struggle between the ordered procedures of the American justice system and the anarchic forces of life outside. Every episode, the American justice system tries to combat crime through the same two-beat process: police investigation, DA prosecution. And every episode, this tidy, two-beat process is challenged by the intemperate appetites of criminals and the unreliability of witnesses and the randomness of juries and other wild and unruly elements that throw the cops and the courts into confusion. What led to this ugly mess of a crime scene? What's a real clue and what's a fluky coincidence? Who's misremembering a fact or lawlessly not telling the truth? Where did the witness disappear to? Will the suspect turn on his confederates? Will the jury hang? The more that the ordered procedures of the law gain the upper hand, the more that the plot moves towards the simple dum-dum of a successful investigation, successful prosecution. But the more that the chaotic helter-skelter of life's disorder gains the upper hand, the more that this dum-dum is delayed, ground to a halt, and forced to retreat. As the investigation struggles, the entrance of the DAs into the story is held off longer and longer, and the narrative can even reverse course and move back from the DAs to the cops as the prosecution breaks down. Because this conflict inheres in the story world of Law & Order, it's bigger than any of the characters. Season after season, new cops come and new cops go. New lawyers come and new lawyers go. Every episode, there's a fresh set of criminal antagonists. In some episodes, even the cops and the lawyers succumb to chaos and misrule. Sometimes their vanity or their ego or their impatience leads them to cut corners. Sometimes they just get unlucky or make a mistake. But as characters stumble and plots twist and turn, the force that drives all these changes remains steadfastly consistent. It's always a conflict between law and chaos, between the two-beat procedure of the justice system and the anarchic disruptions of life's entropic underworld. This consistency of the story world is what keeps the audience's experience constant. No matter what episode of Law & Order you watch, no matter who the characters are or what happens in the plot, the show's engine always generates the same cognitive mixture of intrigue and suspense. By pulling us, the viewers, between order and chaos, between the tidy facts before us and the sudden twists that disrupt those certainties, each episode encourages us to have sudden epiphanies about whodunit, and then to second-guess ourselves, to get a hunch about what the jury will decide, and then to question it, to decide that we were right all along, and then to hesitate once again. That's the cognitive experience of watching Law & Order every time. And at the end of every episode, if you enjoyed that cognitive experience of suspenseful curiosity, you immediately want to watch another episode to prolong the feeling. The big lesson here is that when you're writing a TV series, you want to focus on the deep conflict in the story world, not on superficial plot formulas. Audiences don't tune in for plot formulas. They want psychological consistency, not story beat predictability. And in fact, if your plots become predictable, audiences will quickly get bored and tune out. Instead, good TV writing comes from building a strong and original story engine, so that every episode of your TV series delivers the same special viewing experience. It always feels like your TV show, and it never feels like any other TV show. So that's the big difference between TV and film. Films have a one-off conflict between story world and character. TV requires an engine of ongoing conflict within the story world that keeps the plot going and the viewing experience constant. To get a little deeper into the nuts and bolts of this difference between film and TV, let's now contrast a specific film with a specific TV show. And to keep the comparison as clear as possible, let's make the film and the TV show the same. In terms of raw audience share, the most successful American TV series of all time was MASH, which ran on CBS from 1972 to 1983, and which had a series finale that drew 106 million viewers, or almost half of the US population. And this TV series was based on the enormously popular film of the same name, which was the third highest grossing film of 1970, managing even to beat out the Oscar-winning Patton. So to explore the deep difference between writing successfully for film and writing successfully for TV, let's see how MASH the film became a blockbuster by establishing a conflict between story world and character, and let's see how MASH the TV show became an equally big hit by establishing a conflict just within the story world. We'll begin, as always, by turning to the endings of our two scripts and reverse engineering from their cognitive effects. So if you haven't had a chance to read the scripts for MASH the film or for MASH the TV show's series finale, now's the time to hit pause so that you can enjoy them. On a superficial level, the endings of MASH the film and MASH the TV series seem the same. In both, a pair of doctors working in a MASH unit during the Korean War pack up their medical kits and return to America. But the cognitive effects of these two endings are very different. In the film, the two main doctors drive away in the Jeep they stole at the beginning as a loudspeaker blares out an ironic final comment on the movie.
Attention! Tonight's movie has been MASH. Follow the zany antics of our combat surgeons as they cut and stitch their way along the front lines. Starring Donald Sutherland, Elliot Gould, Tom Skerritt, Sally Kellerman, Robert Duvall. That is all.
This can seem a very bizarre way to end a script, but it borrows directly from Bertolt Brecht, the originator of the alienation effect, which we discussed back in our lecture on Do the Right Thing. Brecht used to have his actors change their costumes on stage to call attention to the fact that it was all just a show, and the loudspeaker in MASH has exactly the same effect. It announces that MASH is just a performance, and it undresses its characters, revealing that they're just actors playing a part. And also like Brecht, the ending of MASH bends the plot into a giant loop. In Brecht's play, Mother Courage and Her Children, the script ends on exactly the same story beat that it begins on, showing the same wagon as it pulls through the same war zone. MASH follows this blueprint scrupulously as the doctors drive away in the same Jeep that they came in, and the war continues on just as it was. This alienation effect denies emotional closure to the audience. Instead, it makes us uncomfortably aware that the horror of war is persisting unabated, encouraging us to stand up and make changes to the world. So our conflict is clearly against the world of war. MASH, the TV show, ends with a very different cognitive effect. The final episode of the TV series concludes with BJ and Hawkeye parting company after the war has already ended.
Look, I know how tough it is for you to say goodbye, so I'll say it. Maybe you're right. Maybe we'll see each other again. But in case we don't, I want you to know how much you've meant to me. I'll never be able to shake you. Whenever I see a big pair of feet or a cheesy mustache, I'll think of you.
Whenever I smell month-old socks, I'll think of you.
And the next time somebody nails my shoe to the floor.
And when somebody gives me a martini that tastes like lighter fluid,
I'll miss you.
I'll miss you a lot. I can't imagine what this place would have been like if I hadn't found you here.
Then Hawkeye and BJ hug. And as Hawkeye looks down from his chopper, he sees that BJ has written out a message for him. It's the word goodbye, spelled out in stones on the chopper pad. So unlike in MASH the film, the conflict here in the TV series isn't a straightforward conflict against the war, because there are things about the war that the doctors will miss. Instead, the TV conflict is a conflict within the world of war. Because in this TV world, war isn't a single bad thing. It's two opposite things, good and bad. There are the pointless deaths, the heartbreak, the human cruelty and futility. But there are also the friendships and the daily triumphs, the hard-won moments of hope and joy and dignity. This conflict within the story world of the TV series creates a similar conflict within the main characters of the TV series. Instead of being simply alienated from the war, like the doctors of the film, the doctors of the TV series experience a bittersweet nostalgia. Even as BJ and Hawkeye look forward to San Francisco and clean clothes and real food, they also look back fondly on Korea and its month-old socks and lighter fluid martinis as the bad and the good of their military experience clashes within their hearts. So in other words, where the doctors of MASH the film are in conflict with the world of war, the characters in MASH the TV show are windows into the deeper conflict of the world. That's why at the end of the TV series, BJ and Hawkeye's final lines voice this conflict between the bad of war and the good. And it's also why, as we noted in our introductory lectures on character, BJ and Hawkeye and all of the other characters in MASH the TV show generate the specific cognitive effect we call sympathy. The inner essence of every TV character is the conflict of their story world. And when characters express an inner conflict, as we saw in our introductory lectures, they speak in soliloquies, and soliloquies generate sympathy. What makes the characters of TV shows different from each other is that they offer slightly different angles onto the story world's conflict, like different windows into the same room. So BJ is a little more reserved and pragmatic about the tragic comedy of war, while Hawkeye is a little more emotional. But the fact that all of the characters of a TV series offer windows into the same deep conflict means that they can always be swapped out and exchanged, like one pane of glass for another. This happens all the time in MASH when different episodes focus more on one main character than the others. But it also happens more dramatically when main characters are literally eliminated from the series for good. Over the 11 seasons of MASH, Trapper John is replaced by B.J. Honeycutt, Colonel Henry Blake is replaced by Colonel Sherman Potter, Major Frank Burns is replaced by Major Charles Winchester III. Main characters can come and go like this in TV shows because the engine of the story is the deeper world conflict beneath them. The characters are just an opening for us to view it. The role of TV characters as windows into the more enduring conflict in the story world also means that antagonists work very differently in TV than in film. In film, the antagonist is the human face of the world that the hero fights against. In TV, the antagonist is instead an expression of the same world conflict that beats inside the hero's hearts. And so rather than simply encouraging negative feelings in the audience, most antagonists will, as the series progresses, inspire increasing amounts of sympathy. We can clearly see this difference between film and TV antagonists by turning to the antagonist's final scene in MASH the film and MASH the TV series. In MASH the film, the antagonist is Major Burns, an incompetent and repulsively smug doctor who endangers the lives of his patients and pompously bullies the other medical staff. Burns meets his end when he's humiliated by Hawkeye for his private relationship with Hot Lips. Hawkeye demands, "Is she better than self-abuse? Would you say that she was a moaner, Frank? Or does she lie there quiet and not do anything at all?" Burns responds to this attack by punching Hawkeye, leading Hawkeye to humiliate him further. "Frank Burns has gone nuts." Trapper John then yells, "Watch out for your goodies. The man is a sex maniac. I don't think Hot Lips satisfied him." At this point, Burns is shoved into a straitjacket and hauled away, prompting Duke to dryly complain, "Colonel, fair's fair. If I nail Hot Lips and punch Hawkeye, can I go home?" Everything about this scene is constructed to turn the audience against Burns. He's the face of the ugly and stupid world that the heroes of the film are fighting against, so we in the audience smirk at his destruction. In contrast, in the final episode of MASH the TV show, the main antagonist is made an object of sympathy. This antagonist is Major Charles Winchester, the season 6 replacement for Frank Burns. In the final episode, after Winchester has tried to teach 5 Chinese POWs to play Mozart, he sees them loaded onto a truck. Rushing out, he's told that the POWs are being collected for a prisoner swap. Winchester desperately tries to stop the exchange. He's come so close to teaching the POWs to play Mozart. It's given him a ray of hope, and he can't bear to stop the lessons now. But Winchester is overruled, and the truck pulls away. And then, as Winchester looks on in despair, the Chinese musicians take out their instruments and play the Mozart exactly the way that Winchester had been trying to teach them. So as Winchester watches the musicians leave, his anguish melts away. And at the same time, the PA announces the end of the war, and everyone explodes with joy. The script, in other words, makes clear that Winchester's sense of happiness is shared by everyone. Instead of being in conflict with the main characters, Winchester feels exactly like them. If the show had stopped here, it would already be a massive departure from the original film. But the show then aligns Winchester even more profoundly with the other characters, because a few scenes later, Winchester is in the OR trying to save the final victims of the war when he comes upon a hopeless case, a patient missing half his chest. And then, to his horror, Winchester realizes that the patient is the Chinese flutist. In shock, Winchester says, "He wasn't even a soldier, he was a musician. What happened to the other people in the truck with him?" To which the corpsman replies, "He's the only one that made it this far." Winchester is shattered by this revelation, and he staggers out of the OR back to his tent. He puts on his record player, listening to a few bars of the Mozart he taught to the Chinese musicians, and then he grabs the record and smashes it in despair. Like Major Burns when he's dragged away in a straitjacket in the film, Winchester has just had the limits of his power crushingly exposed. And yet we're not smirking at Winchester like we smirked at Burns. We're feeling with him. Just as we felt his joy at the end of the war, now we feel his horror at its pointless destruction. And so in Winchester, we get the whole tragicomic experience of MASH, the TV show. He encapsulates both the joy and the heartbreak, the hard-earned victories and the brutal defeats. In other words, like all the characters in the TV series, Winchester soliloquizes the world's deep conflict, and so our hearts open up to him in sympathy. And this, in a nutshell, is the difference between antagonists in film and TV. In film, the antagonist is opposed by the main characters. In TV, the antagonist is one of the main characters, a window into the same conflict as everyone else. And so in TV, instead of hating the antagonists, we eventually come to identify with them too. So to convert MASH the film into MASH the TV show, the writers had to convert the conflict between the characters and the world of war into a conflict within the world of war, building a TV engine that created a rotating cast of sympathetic characters and hundreds of hours of new plots. So how did the writers of MASH do this? Well, the short answer is that they did what writers always do when writers launch a TV series. They wrote a special episode known as the pilot episode, which constructs the engine and gets the wheels turning. In our next lecture, we'll look in detail at how to build a TV pilot, but to round off our discussion of MASH and give you a first look at how pilots work, let's wrap this lecture by turning to the pilot for MASH and seeing how it establishes a conflict in its story world that generates a bittersweet sense of the entwined good and bad of war. MASH's pilot begins with a series of vignettes. Hawkeye and Trapper John drink martinis and play golf in a minefield. Hot Lips and Frank Burns read the Bible and the U.S. Army manual while they play footsie in bed. Commander Henry Blake works with surgical concentration to open a bottle of champagne. When suddenly the air rescue siren sounds and the PA blares, "Attention, all personnel, report immediately to admitting ward and operating room." So that's the pilot's two-step recipe for establishing the conflict of its story world. First, show a group of characters who embody both the good and the bad of wartime medicine. Second, bring them all together into the same operating room to save the same lives, so the audience sees the good and the bad of the war, entwined together as one. This is a great model for starting your own first pilot. Show little snippets of both sides of the conflict in your story world, cutting back and forth between your main heroes and your antagonists, before showing that in this world, both your heroes and your antagonists have to work together on the same mission to do the same thing. Having established this tragicomic story world, the pilot then begins to flesh out its characters, expanding them from the little comic contradictions of its opening vignettes into individuals who each offer their own perspective into the deeper conflict of the story world. The first character that the script introduces in depth is Hawkeye, and his introduction makes clear that unlike in the film, Hawkeye is not in conflict against the world of war. Instead, he's a window for the audience to see into the world and feel with it. The pilot accomplishes this task by giving Hawkeye a voiceover where he describes his job to his father. So this voiceover quite literally serves as a first-person window into Hawkeye's world, allowing us to see it through his eyes. And to introduce us to both sides of the tragicomic story world, Hawkeye's voiceover describes both the dark side and the bright side of his military experience. He's honest about the shortcomings of his job and admits he can sound callous. But he also sees his work as good and important. It helps save human lives. So Hawkeye, in other words, delivers a soliloquy that taps into the deep conflict of the story world, generating sympathy for Hawkeye, but also more deeply for the story world around him. And this is another simple technique you can try when writing your next pilot. After you've introduced the big conflict in your story world, introduce your first main character through a voiceover where he explores both the good and the bad of that conflict, generating a soliloquy that encourages the audience to identify with both that character and the world of the series as a whole. The plot of MASH's pilot is similarly reverse engineered to convey the experience of the story world's tragicomic conflict. Its main action is a scheme that Hawkeye concocts with Trapper John. And that scheme is to get their Korean houseboy, Ho-Jon, the money he needs to go to college. And to pull off this scheme, the two doctors concoct a roguish plan to host a debauched party, raffle off a weekend with a nurse, and then rig the raffle. The plot, in short, is a tale of doing good by doing bad. Like everything in the war, it's a mixture of the bitter and the sweet. And finally, the pilot's ending is also built to reinforce the show's tragicomic cognitive effect. At the end of the pilot, Hawkeye's plan seems to be ruined by a general who tries to send him home immediately. But then, the general witnesses Hawkeye operate and reverses his earlier decision.
He was too impressed to have you arrested.
We did it again. Screwed up in reverse.
I keep telling you, we gotta give up this preoccupation with keeping people alive or we'll never get out of here.
So even though the general seems like a bad guy, the pilot reveals that he isn't. Like everyone in the war, the general sees that the good always comes mixed with the bad, and so he pardons the doctor's bad behavior to preserve their good surgical skills. This moment in the pilot is in direct contrast to the film, where after Hawkeye performs an unauthorized operation on a child, he's charged by the hospital's commander for misusing Army resources and is forced to blackmail the commander to escape. So the TV pilot breaks sharply with the film by culminating in a moment where both Hawkeye and his antagonist become faces of the same world. In doing so, it once again establishes that the TV series will be about a conflict within that story world, and the characters will all be windows into it. In our lecture on Game of Thrones, we'll explore the structure of pilots more deeply, and in the next 3 lectures after that, we'll analyze 3 other major genres of contemporary TV scripts, giving you blueprints for writing cable serials, network procedurals, primetime soaps, and sitcoms. But the big screenwriting lesson from this lecture is that the pilots of all TV scripts, whether they're sitcoms or soaps, procedurals or dramas, work tirelessly to establish the show's engine. And they do that by establishing a deep conflict in the story world, by introducing all the main characters, including the antagonists, as windows into that conflict, and by using all the story beats of the plot from beginning to end to provide viewers with a consistent cognitive experience of that conflict. Because what makes TV writing special is its consistency. The real world may toss and change and flip us upside down, but in TV we can find a world that goes on and on the same, offering an anchor and a respite from the storm. If you'd like to get started on the transition from film scripts to TV, here's a couple of exercises you can try. First, plan the adaptation of one of your favorite movies into a TV show. Identify the movie's conflict between character and story world, and translate it into a conflict within just the story world. Then adapt or create a group of characters who inhabit that conflicted world and offer a window into it. Second, write an opening scene for your TV pilot that follows the model of MASH. Introduce your main characters, including your antagonists, in groups of 2 through a series of short opening vignettes. And then bring them together in a single place or event that embodies the core conflict of the world. And there you go. You've just built your first TV engine.